They didn't even make it past the doorway. My mother's suitcase tipped sideways onto the hardwood floor, the wheels still spinning as if the house itself had rejected her return. My father stood behind her, one hand still on the handle of the front door, his mouth opening and closing without sound. They were staring at the living room, at the hospital bed, at the oxygen machine humming low and steady where my father's leather recliner used to be, at my sister, and then at me. My mother's voice came out in a whisper that didn't belong to her. No, this can't be happening. She took one step forward, her eyes scanning the IV stand, the medical charts clipped neatly to a board, the stack of envelopes on the coffee table. My father's face lost all color. "What did you do?" he asked. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because none of it made sense to them, not the silence, not the order, not the way the house no longer felt like theirs. And that was the point. A month earlier, the house had been quiet in a different way. Heavy. Like grief was already sitting in the corners, waiting for something worse. My parents stood in the kitchen, avoiding eye contact with each other, with me with Lily. Lily was at the table, wrapped in a blanket, even though it was late spring. Her hands trembled slightly around a mug she hadn't touched. My mother finally spoke. "I think we all need some space." It sounded rehearsed. My father nodded quickly, too quickly. "This environment, it's not healthy, not for any of us." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed still in my off-duty clothes. I had been home less than a week. "Space," I repeated. No one answered right away. Lily gave a small, tired smile like she was trying to make it easier for them. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'll be fine." That was Lily, always the one smoothing things over. My mother reached for her purse. "We've already booked the trip," she said. "It's just for a little while, a reset." "Where?" I asked. "Europe," my father said like it was a reasonable detail. "Italy, France, a few places." "For how long?" There was a pause. "A month." The word sat in the room like something rotten. I looked at Lily. She was staring at the table now, her fingers tightening around the mug. "You're leaving," I said slowly, "for a month." My father's jaw tightened. "You just got back," he said. "You can handle things here, you're capable." He didn't say it like a compliment. He said it like an excuse. My mother avoided my eyes. "We'll check in," she added quickly. "Of course we will." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Her dialysis schedule just increased," I said. 3 times a week, sometimes 4. I know my mother said too fast. "And the insurance situation is still a mess." "We left you the documents," my father cut in. "Everything's organized." Everything's organized. Like it was a business trip. Like Lily was a set of files. I straightened, my voice steady. "You're really doing this?" Neither of them answered directly. My mother picked up her purse again. "We need this," she said quietly. That was the closest thing to honesty I was going to get. They needed it. So they were taking it. And leaving everything else behind. The morning they left, the house felt hollow. Suitcases rolled across the floor, zippers closed, car doors slammed. My father gave me a firm nod like we were handing off a shift. "You've got this," he said. My mother hugged Lily, holding on a second longer than usual, but not long enough. "We'll be back before you know it," she whispered. Lily smiled because that's what she did. "I'll be here," she said. They didn't look back when they drove away. I stood in the driveway until their car disappeared at the end of the street. Then I went inside. The first night, Lily tried to act normal. We watched an old movie we'd both seen a dozen times. She laughed at the right parts, even when I knew she was exhausted. "You don't have to sit with me all night," she said at one point. "I'm okay." I shook my head. "I've handled worse watches," I said. That made her smile a little. "You always say that." "Because it's true." But this wasn't the same. Out there you trained for what might happen. Here you watched something you couldn't fight. The routine started the next morning. Dialysis appointments, medication schedules, phone calls with insurance reps who spoke in circles. I learned how to read her lab results, how to adjust her diet, how to recognize the subtle signs that something wasn't right. I set alarms for everything. I didn't miss a single one. At night I sat at the kitchen table with stacks of paperwork spread out in front of me. Bills. Statements. Denials. My parents texted occasionally. Pictures of landmarks. Smiling faces in front of fountains and old buildings. "Thinking of you both," my mother wrote once, followed by a heart emoji. I stared at the message for a long time before setting the phone down. A week in Lily had a bad day. She could barely make it from the car to the front door. I caught her before she fell. "I'm okay," she insisted, even as her knees buckled. "You don't have to say that," I told her quietly. She leaned against me, her weight lighter than it should have been. "I just don't want to be a burden," she whispered. The word hit harder than anything else. "You're not," I said firm. "You're not a burden." She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe it. That night, I stayed awake in the chair beside her bed, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, counting each one like it mattered. Because it did. 2 weeks in, the doctor called me into his office. He didn't waste time. "Her condition is progressing faster than we hoped," he said. I kept my face neutral. "What are our options?" He folded his hands. "A transplant would give her the best chance. And if that doesn't happen?" He hesitated. "Then we manage symptoms, keep her comfortable." "Comfortable?" I nodded once. "Run the compatibility tests," I said. He looked at me carefully. "For you?" "Yes." The test results came back 3 days later. I was a match. I sat in my truck in the hospital parking lot, the paper in my hand. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like a line I couldn't step back from. I thought about calling my parents, about telling them, about giving them a chance to come home. I picked up my phone. Then I put it back down, because I already knew what they would say. "Wait. Let's talk about this. Don't do anything drastic." They had already made their choice. Now I was making mine. That night I sat beside Lily's bed again. She was half asleep, her voice soft. "You're still here," she murmured. "Yeah," I said. She smiled faintly. "I knew you would be." I swallowed the words catching in my throat. "Always," I said. The next morning I walked into the hospital and signed the consent forms. No hesitation. No second call. Just a pen, a line, and a decision. Because some things don't wait for permission. The consent forms were still warm from my hand when I stepped out of the hospital and into the late afternoon light. The air smelled like cut grass and hot pavement. Across the parking lot, a young couple stood beside a minivan, arguing quietly over a car seat. An older man in a baseball cap pushed his wife's wheelchair toward the entrance, with the slow patience of someone who had done it for years. Life was moving all around me in ordinary ways, and for one brief moment I had the strange thought that the world should have stopped. It hadn't. I sat in my truck, closed the door, and laid my forehead against the steering wheel. I was a match. Not just a possibility, not just hope floating in the vague language doctors use when they don't want families to fall apart in front of them. A match. The transplant coordinator had walked me through the steps in a calm, practiced voice. More tests, clearance, surgery dates, risks, recovery, the impact it might have on my military future. All of it laid out plainly without drama. I appreciated that. At my age and after the life I'd lived, I had learned that the quiet facts were usually more frightening than raised voices. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. For one foolish second, I thought it might be one of my parents. It was my mother, but not in the way I meant. She had posted another photo. This one was in front of a canal somewhere in Venice, smiling beneath a striped awning, a glass of white wine in her hand. My father stood beside her in sunglasses, looking relaxed in a way I had not seen in months, maybe years. The caption read, "Taking time to breathe. Everyone needs that sometimes." I stared at it until the screen went dark. Then I drove home. When I opened the front door, Lily was asleep in the recliner with a blanket around her shoulders, her face turned toward the window. The afternoon sun made her look younger than 30, almost like the little girl who used to sit on the porch steps and wait for me to come home from school. Her hair had thinned, her cheeks had hollowed. But when she slept, some small trace of that old softness came back. I set my keys down quietly and stood there a moment, just watching her breathe. The machine beside her clicked softly as it monitored her oxygen. The coffee table was covered in pill bottles, printouts, appointment cards, and a legal pad where I had started keeping track of everything: blood pressure, fluid intake, headaches, nausea, fatigue, insurance calls, prescription refills. I had turned our parents' living room into a care station. Not because I wanted to make a point, because there had been no other choice. Lily woke when the floor creaked under my boot. "You're back," she said, pushing herself up slowly. "Yeah." "How'd it go?" I hesitated just long enough for her to notice. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That look usually means I'm not going to like the answer. It means I'm thinking. Same thing when it comes to you. I almost smiled. I took the chair across from her and leaned forward, resting my forearms on my knees. They ran more tests. And I'm a match. She went very still. For a second, she didn't seem to understand the words. Then I watched them land. "No," she said immediately. "Lily. Number." Her voice wasn't loud, that made it harder. "You are not doing that. I already said yes to the next round of evaluation." She shook her head, eyes shining now. "That's not your decision to make by yourself." "It is my kidney." "That isn't what I mean." I looked down at my hands. "I know." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself as if the room had suddenly gone cold. "You just got back," she said. "You have your career, your health, your whole life ahead of you. And so do you." "No," she said so softly I barely heard it. "Not like you." That was the first time she had spoken her fear out loud. Not in statistics, not in doctors' phrases, not in cheerful little lies. Just the truth. I got up and moved to the couch beside her. "Look at me," I said. She did. "We are not going to talk like you're already gone." She tried to laugh, but it came out broken. "You can't save everybody." "No," I said, "but I can help you, and I will." She lowered her eyes. "What if something happens to you?" "It won't." "You don't know that." She was right. I did know risk. I knew that better than most people. Every career decision I had made since I was young had come with some version of it. That didn't make me reckless. It made me clear-eyed. "I know enough," I said. "And I know this much: I'm not going to sit here and watch you fade away while I wait for Mom and Dad to finish eating pasta in Italy." At that, Lily flinched, not because of my tone, but because I had said what both of us had been trying not to say. She swallowed hard. "Maybe they just couldn't handle it." I turned and looked at her. "Is that really what you think?" She didn't answer. That was answer enough. The truth was, I had spent half my life making excuses for our parents. So had Lily. Dad worked hard. Mom was overwhelmed. Things were complicated. Money was tight. Stress does strange things to people. Nobody's perfect. All those explanations had a little truth in them. That was what made them useful. But there comes a point in life when age strips away the luxury of soft language. You stop saying people were confused when they were selfish. You stop saying they were tired when they were absent. You stop saying they meant well when what they did caused harm. Lily looked over at the framed family photo still sitting on the bookshelf. It had been taken at a church picnic years ago. Dad in a short-sleeved button-down. Mom laughing at something off-camera. Lily and me standing on either side of them. We had looked like the kind of family people trusted. "Do you think they'll come back if I get worse?" she asked. The question was so gentle it nearly undid me. I kept my voice even. "They're coming back." "That's not what I asked." I leaned back and stared at the opposite wall. "No," I thought. "No, I don't. Not in the way that matters." But I couldn't say that to her, not when she was already carrying enough. So I said, "I'm here." She gave a small nod, the kind people give when they hear the answer behind the answer. That evening I made her broth and toast, though she only managed a few bites. Afterward, I sat at the kitchen table and spent nearly 2 hours on the phone with the insurance company being transferred from one department to another, explaining the same thing in 6 different ways. By the end of the call, they had denied coverage for a medication her nephrologist had marked urgent. I wrote down the appeal instructions, thanked the woman on the phone, even though neither of us meant it, and hung up. Then I opened the stack of mail. Utility bill. Hospital statement. Lab invoice. Another hospital statement. The numbers blurred for a moment. I got up, walked to the garage, and stood beside my truck in the dim light. Then I looked over at my second vehicle, an older SUV I had kept because it was practical, dependable, and already paid off. The next morning I sold it. The man who bought it was decent enough. He asked if I was sure. I told him yes. He counted out a cashier's check in front of me on the hood and shook my hand. I thanked him, signed the title, and watched him drive away in a vehicle I had planned to keep another 10 years. That money paid for medications, home equipment, and part of Lily's outstanding balance. It also bought me something I needed more than pride. Time. That night after dialysis, Lily was so exhausted she could barely lift her head from the seat. I helped her into bed, adjusted her blanket, and turned off the lamp. At the door, I heard her say my name. I turned back. "You shouldn't have to do all this," she whispered. I thought about my parents under European lights, about their photographs, their captions, their easy smiles. Then I looked at my sister. "Maybe not," I said, "but I'm the one here." She closed her eyes, and I stayed in the hallway a long time after the room had gone quiet. Because being the one who stays does something to a person. It doesn't make you noble. It doesn't make you stronger than everyone else. It just leaves you without the luxury of pretending you didn't know what had to be done. 3 mornings later, the transplant coordinator called while I was standing in the laundry room folding towels. Her voice was calm and matter-of-fact. "We'd like to move you into the next phase of testing," she said. "Cardiac clearance, imaging, blood work, surgical consult. If everything holds, we can begin talking about dates." I looked through the doorway into the living room where Lily was asleep in the hospital bed we had rented 2 days earlier. That bed was what my parents had seen when they came home. That bed was the first thing that had made my mother lose her breath. At the time, I hadn't known it would come to that. But once Lily started having trouble making it from the recliner to the bathroom without stopping to rest, I knew the house needed to change. The delivery men had been respectful, quiet, efficient. They moved out my father's leather chair, set up the bed by the front window, plugged in the oxygen unit, showed me how to work the rails, then left me standing in the middle of the living room with a clipboard and a receipt. I signed my name and realized not for the first time that a person can watch their whole family shift shape without a single dramatic moment. Sometimes it happens through paperwork, through rented equipment, through meals gone cold on the kitchen counter because somebody is too tired to eat them. "I can come in this afternoon," I told the coordinator. "That works," she said. "And Lieutenant?" I still wasn't used to hearing my rank in a medical setting. "Yes. You should know the surgeons will talk to you very plainly. This is not a minor decision." "I know." When I hung up, I stood there a moment with a towel in my hands, listening to the hum of the dryer and the oxygen machine in the next room. Then Lily woke and called my name. By the time I got to her, she had pushed herself halfway upright and was trying not to look winded. "You okay?" I asked. "Just thirsty." I handed her the cup with the bendable straw, and she took a few slow sips. "You've got your serious face on," she said. "That doesn't narrow it down much." "It does when you're trying to pretend everything's fine." I sat on the edge of the chair beside the bed. "Hospital called, more testing." She let that settle between us. "For the transplant?" "Yes." She looked toward the front window at the strip of neighborhood visible between the curtains. Mrs. Donnelly from next door was walking her beagle. A delivery truck slowed near the mailbox. Somewhere down the block, a lawn mower started up. "Normal life moving on schedule." Lily's voice came out quiet. "You really aren't waiting for them, are you?" "Number." Her eyes returned to mine. "Have you even told them?" I didn't answer fast enough. "That means no," she said. "I haven't told them yet." "You should." "Why?" Her face tightened. "Because they're still our parents." I leaned back and looked at her for a long moment. There it was again, that reflex both of us had grown up with. The reflex to preserve their place in the story even when they had stepped out of it themselves. "They know you're getting worse," I said. "They know I'm here alone with you. They know the bills are piling up. They know what dialysis means. That's not the same as knowing you're about to give up a kidney." "No," I said, "it isn't." She lowered her gaze. "And if you tell them after it's done," she said, "it'll feel like punishment." That word stayed with me long after she drifted back to sleep. Punishment. I didn't want punishment. Punishment was loud, personal, hot-blooded. What I wanted was harder to explain. I wanted truth laid out where it couldn't be stepped around. I wanted a reckoning that wasn't built on shouting, because shouting gives selfish people something to hide behind. They can always say emotions got out of control. They can call it a misunderstanding, a bad day, a tragic overreaction. No. I wanted them to face facts so plain and orderly that there would be no room left for excuses. That afternoon, I took Lily to dialysis, waited through the session, then drove straight to the hospital for my own appointments. The surgical consult was on the 4th floor in an office that smelled faintly of coffee and antiseptic. The surgeon was older than I expected. Silver hair, steady hands, wedding ring worn thin from years. He had the kind of face that told people the truth for a living. He reviewed my chart, then looked at me over his glasses. You understand this could affect your future service? Yes. You understand recovery can be complicated even when the surgery goes well? Yes. And you understand he said that donors sometimes minimize what they're giving because they're focused on the person they love. I sat still. With respect, doctor, I said, I'm not minimizing anything. He held my gaze a moment longer, then nodded once. Good, he said, because I'm not here to talk you out of it. I'm here to make sure you know what it costs. There was something almost comforting in that. Not because the cost was small, but because he didn't insult me by pretending otherwise. He walked me through incision sites, pain management, expected limitations, possible complications. Then he set the folder down and folded his hands. Do you have support at home? I almost laughed. Not the kind you mean. He must have seen something in my expression because he didn't press. He simply wrote a note in the file. When I left the hospital, the sun was already going down. My phone buzzed just as I reached the parking garage. This time it was my mother calling. I stood there for a second, looking at her name on the screen. Then I answered. Hi, sweetheart, she said with a brightness that felt almost aggressive. I could hear restaurant noise in the background, glassware, voices, music. Hi, Mom. We just finished dinner. Florence is beautiful. You would love it here. I said nothing. She seemed to notice the silence then. How's Lily? Tired. Oh, well, tell her we miss her. Miss her. I shut my eyes for a moment. She's not a summer house, I said. You don't miss her. You left her. My mother's voice dropped. That's not fair. No. We needed some time, she said. Your father and I were falling apart. And leaving your daughters fixed that. She inhaled sharply. Why are you being like this? Because someone had to be. Instead, I said, I'm taking Lily to appointments. I'm handling the bills. I'm handling the house. I'm handling everything. We appreciate that, she said quickly. That almost made me laugh. Do you? Yes, of course. Enough to come home. Silence. In the background, I heard a man speaking Italian to another table. My mother lowered her voice as if that made the moment private. We're already halfway through the trip. I looked out across the garage at the evening sky turning dark over the city. There it was. The truth again, not hidden, not even dressed up much. Already halfway through the trip. Not, is she worse? Not, what do the doctors say? Not, do you need us? Just the trip, its schedule, its inconvenience, its importance. I'm a donor match, I said. The line went silent. What? For Lily. My mother did not speak for a full 3 seconds. Then she said exactly what I had known she would say. Don't do anything drastic. We'll talk when we get back. I stared at the concrete floor. When you get back, I repeated. Yes, please, just wait. That word settled something in me. Wait. Wait while Lily faded. Wait while they finished dessert. Wait while they returned to their own lives slowly and on their own terms. No, I said. My mother's breath caught. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm done waiting. Before she could answer, I ended the call. I stood in that parking garage, a long time, phone still in my hand, feeling not rage, but a cold, clarifying stillness. When I got home, Lily was awake in the living room bed with the lamp on low. She looked at my face and immediately knew something had happened. You told her. I did. And I took off my jacket and set it over the chair. And she told me not to do anything drastic. Lily closed her eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, I'm sorry. I walked over and adjusted the blanket around her shoulders. This isn't yours to be sorry for. The next morning, I went back to the hospital and signed the final consent to proceed. Not because I was fearless. Because some decisions become clearer the longer other people avoid making theirs. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday. They told me to arrive before dawn. No food after midnight. Clear liquids only. Bring a list of medications. Arrange for someone to drive me home. I nodded through all of it like I was being briefed for an operation. Only this time I wasn't stepping into it alone. Or at least that's what I told myself. The night before, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote everything down. Passwords, account numbers, insurance contacts, the name of Lily's nephrologist, her medication schedule in case something went wrong and someone else had to step in. I even wrote down the name of the neighbor, Mrs. Donnelly, and her phone number in case Lily needed help while I was still in the hospital. I wrote like I was preparing for absence. Not because I expected the worst, but because I had spent enough years in uniform to know that hoping things go right is not the same as planning for when they don't. Around 10, Lily shuffled into the kitchen wrapped in her blanket. "You're still up," she said. "So are you." She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down slowly. "What are you writing?" "Just making sure things are covered." Her eyes moved over the pad. "That's a lot of just." I set the pen down. "It's nothing you need to worry about." "That's not how this works anymore," she said gently. "We don't get to decide what the other one worries about." She was right. We hadn't been living that way for weeks. I leaned back in the chair. "Surgery's at 6 in the morning," I said. She nodded once like she had been bracing for the confirmation. "And you didn't tell them again," she said. "Number." "Not even after the call." "Number." She exhaled slowly. "I keep thinking maybe they'll show up at the last minute," she said. "Like in those movies where someone runs through the airport and realizes what matters." I almost smiled. "This isn't a movie." "I know." She looked down at her hands. I don't want you to go through this without them knowing." "I'm not going through it without someone knowing," I said. She looked up. "I know," I added, "you know." Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. "I wish it was me," she whispered. I shook my head. "I don't." At 4:30 in the morning, the house was silent. I moved carefully, not turning on any more lights than I needed. The routine felt familiar, like early deployments, like quiet departures before anyone else was awake. I paused in the doorway of the living room. Lily was asleep, the soft rise and fall of her chest steady under the blanket. The oxygen machine hummed beside her, a constant low note that had become part of the house. I stood there longer than I meant to. Then I walked over and adjusted the blanket the way I had done every night. "Hey," she said suddenly, her voice rough with sleep. I froze. "You're supposed to be asleep," I said. "So are you." I crouched beside the bed. "You ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." She reached out her hand, finding mine. "You come back," she said. It wasn't a question. "I will." "You promise?" I met her eyes. "I promise." She held on for a second longer, then let go. "Go," she said softly, "before I change my mind." Mrs. Donnelly was waiting in her robe when I stepped outside. "I'll sit with her," she said, as if we had done this 100 times before. You worry." "Thank you." She waved me off like it was nothing. "Go on now." I drove to the hospital in the dark, the streets nearly empty. When I pulled into the parking lot, the sky was just beginning to lighten. Inside, everything moved in quiet efficiency. Paperwork. Vitals. A nurse with kind eyes who explained each step even though I already understood most of it. They gave me a hospital gown and a plastic bracelet. "Any last questions?" she asked. I thought about it. "Number." She smiled gently. "That's usually a sign someone's already made up their mind." I lay back on the narrow bed as they wheeled me toward the operating room. The ceiling lights passed overhead one by one. For a moment I let my eyes close. Not in fear. Just in stillness. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the quiet of the house. A different kind. Controlled, measured, clinical. The second thing was the pain. It wasn't sharp. Not at first. More like a deep, heavy pressure that reminded me something had changed inside me. A nurse leaned over. "You're in recovery," she said. "Surgery went well." I nodded slightly. "Your sister is stable," she added. That was the only part that mattered. The next few days blurred together. Pain medication. Short walks down the hallway. Doctors checking incisions. Nurses adjusting IV lines. I learned to move carefully, to sit up without pulling too hard, to breathe through the discomfort instead of fighting it. Lily was in a different room, but they let me see her once I was stable enough to be wheeled over. She looked pale, smaller than ever. But she was awake. "Hey," she said when she saw me. "Hey." Her voice was stronger than I expected. "You did it." "So did you." She smiled faintly. "You always did like being the overachiever." I almost laughed, but the movement pulled at my side and reminded me not to. We didn't talk long. We didn't need to. There was a kind of understanding that didn't require words. On the third day, I asked for my phone. The nurse hesitated. Just for a few minutes, I said. She handed it to me. There were messages from my unit. A few from distant relatives. Nothing from my parents. I wasn't surprised. I scrolled past everything and opened the folder where I had been saving documents. Hospital bills. Receipts. Insurance denials. Every call I had logged. Every expense I had covered. Every piece of proof that showed exactly what had happened while they were gone. Not anger. Not revenge in the way people usually mean it. Something quieter. Something more permanent. A record. When they discharged me, Mrs. Donnelly drove me home. "You just rest," she said as she helped me out of the car. "I'll keep an eye on your sister until you're steady on your feet. I appreciate it." "Of course you do," she said, smiling. "Because you were raised right." I didn't answer that. Inside the house felt different. Not empty. Not heavy. Just changed. The hospital bed was still by the window. The paperwork was still on the table. But there was something else now. A kind of quiet certainty. I lowered myself carefully into the chair and looked around the room. At everything that had happened. At everything that had been done. And at everything that had been missed. Because while my parents had been walking through old cities and taking pictures under foreign lights, life here had not paused. It had moved forward. Without them. The first morning back home, I woke before the alarm. Habit. For a second I forgot where I was. Then the ache along my side reminded me, not sharp, just a steady pull that told me to move carefully to respect what had been done. I sat up, slowly waited for the room to settle, then stood. The house was quiet. Not the heavy quiet from before, not the kind that pressed in on your chest. This was different. Measured, intentional. The kind of quiet that comes after something has already been decided. Lily was awake when I reached the living room. She had pushed herself up against the pillows, a book open in her lap. She clearly wasn't reading. "You're up," she said. "So are you." She gave a small smile. I slept. That's good. It was more than good. It was the first time in weeks she had said it without adding a little or not much. I checked the machine, her vitals, the medication schedule I had taped to the side table. All steady. For the first time in a long while, there wasn't an immediate problem to solve. That didn't mean things were easy. It just meant they were moving in the right direction. Recovery is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small things. Lily asking for toast instead of just water. Walking from the bed to the kitchen without needing to stop halfway. Sitting up a little longer each day. Laughing once, really laughing at something on television. Each of those moments mattered more than anything else. By the end of the week, I was able to move through the house without bracing myself against the wall. Slowly. Deliberately. The kind of pace that forces you to notice everything. The sunlight through the front window. The way the floorboards creak near the hallway. The stack of unopened mail still sitting where I had left it. I brought it to the table and started sorting. Bills. More bills. Statements. And then something else. A notice from the mortgage company. I read it twice. Then a third time. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I wanted to make sure I did. That afternoon I called the number listed. The man on the other end sounded tired in the way people do when they've had the same conversation too many times. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "There are outstanding balances, several missed payments." Missed by who, I asked. There was a pause as he checked. "By the account holders," he said. "Your parents." I looked out at the living room, at the hospital bed, at Lily sitting quietly with a blanket around her shoulders. They told me everything was current. I can only tell you what I see here. How long has it been like this? 3 months. 3 months. Before they left. Before the trip. Before they said they needed space. I thanked him, ended the call, and sat there for a long time. Not shocked. Not even angry. Just clear. That night I went through every document in the house. Bank statements. Loan records. Insurance papers. What I found wasn't chaos. It was worse. It was quiet neglect. Late payments. Deferred notices. Minimum balances met just enough to avoid immediate consequences. A slow drift toward a problem they hadn't intended to solve. And then, they left. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not because I wanted a fight. Because I wanted to understand what could be done. His office was downtown in a building that smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. He listened without interrupting as I explained everything. The trip. The medical bills. The missed mortgage payments. The surgery. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "And your goal?" he asked. "I don't want to lose the house," I said. "And I don't want this situation to keep repeating itself." He nodded. "Are you prepared to take financial responsibility?" "I already have." "That's not the same as legal responsibility." I held his gaze. "I am." He studied me for a moment longer, then opened a folder. "There are options," he said, "but they require documentation. Proof of payment, proof of care, proof that you've been the acting responsible party." "I have all of that." "I thought you might." Over the next few days, I gathered everything. Receipts. Hospital bills. Records of payments. Logs of calls. Dates. Times. Details. Not out of anger. Out of precision. Because if there is one thing I learned in uniform, it's that clarity wins where emotion fails. Lily watched me one evening as I organized the paperwork into folders. "You're building a case," she said. "I'm building a record. For them. For the truth." She was quiet for a moment. "That sounds like something that could hurt." "It might. And you're okay with that." I set the folder down and looked at her. "I'm okay with them finally seeing what they chose not to look at." A message came in from my mother that night. A picture. Another restaurant. Another caption. "Can't wait to come home and relax after this trip." Relax. I stared at the word. Then I set the phone face down on the table. 2 days later, another message. "We land tomorrow." No questions. No acknowledgement. Just information. Like they were returning from something routine. Like nothing had changed. I stood in the living room that evening looking at everything. The hospital bed. The medication station. The folders stacked neatly on the table. The house that had been held together by decisions they hadn't made. And I realized something. This wasn't about catching them off guard. It wasn't about anger. It wasn't even about proving a point. It was about letting them walk back into the life they had left. And seeing it exactly as it had been. Without explanation. Without protection. Without anyone softening it for them. The next morning I helped Lily sit up a little straighter. "They're coming home today," I said. She nodded slowly. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been gone a long time," she said, "even though I never left." I understood that. More than she knew. By the afternoon the house was ready. Not staged. Not arranged. Just honest. Every bill in place. Every record visible. Every consequence waiting quietly where it belonged. And when I heard the sound of tires in the driveway, I didn't move. Because some moments don't need preparation. They just need truth. I heard the car doors before I saw them. Then came the scrape of suitcase wheels over the driveway, the quick murmur of my mother saying something I couldn't make out, and my father's heavier steps on the front walk. Inside the house, the oxygen machine hummed softly by the window. Lily sat propped up in the hospital bed, a pale blue blanket over her lap, her hands folded so tightly I could see the strain in her fingers. She had wanted to go back to her room before they arrived. I had asked her once if that was what she really wanted. "No," she said after a long pause. "If they're going to see it, they should see it." So she stayed. I stood near the coffee table, not in the center of the room, not posed, just present. The front door opened. My mother stepped in first, carrying a handbag, and wearing the same travel smile people bring home from vacations, the smile that says they expect to be welcomed back into the lives they paused. My father came in behind her with 2 suitcases, and the stiff, tired posture of a man already annoyed by airports. Then they looked up. Everything after that happened quietly. My mother's suitcase slipped from her hand and tipped over on its side. One wheel spun in the air for a second before stopping. My father's grip stayed on the handle of the larger case, but his shoulders seemed to lock in place. The room was not what they had left. My father's recliner was gone. In its place was the rented hospital bed with the rails half raised. A portable oxygen unit stood beside it. Medication trays lined the side table. A chart hung from a clipboard. Bottles, receipts, appointment summaries, and organized folders covered the coffee table. And Lily, thin, weak but alive, was sitting in the middle of all of it. My mother's eyes moved over the room, then to Lily, then to me. "No," she whispered. "No, this can't be happening." My father set the suitcase down slowly, like he was afraid sudden movement might make the scene worse. "What is all this?" he asked. Neither Lily nor I answered. My mother took a step toward the bed, then another. "Lily, honey." Lily looked at her, not cruelly, not warmly either, just tired. "You came back," she said. The words were simple, but the way she said them made my mother's face tighten. My father looked at the bed, then the oxygen unit, then the folders on the table. "Why is there a hospital bed in my living room?" That was the first thing he chose to say. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened?" Not, "Why didn't anyone tell us?" Just ownership. "My living room." I looked at him for a long moment before I answered. "Because she couldn't make it to her bedroom anymore." He stared at me. My mother put a hand to her mouth. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I said evenly while you were in Europe, Lily got worse." My mother shook her head. No, you said she was tired. You never said..." I said enough. The words came out calm. That seemed to unsettle them more than anger would have. My father frowned. "Why didn't you tell us it had gotten this bad?" I turned slightly and picked up the top folder from the coffee table. "I did," I said. "You just didn't ask the right questions." Silence. I opened the folder and removed a stack of papers clipped together. "This is her dialysis record for the month you were gone," I said, laying it on the table in front of them. "These are the medication changes. These are the insurance denials. These are the home equipment invoices. And these," I set down a second stack, "are the missed mortgage notices that started before you left." My father's face changed then. Not guilt, not yet. Recognition. He knew exactly what I had found. My mother looked from one pile to the next, her breathing starting to quicken. "I don't understand," she said. "You understood enough to leave," I said. My father's jaw set. "Watch your tone." I looked at him. That old reflex was still alive in him. The need to shift the ground to make this about respect instead of truth. "No," I said, "not today." The room went still. Even Lily lifted her head a little more at that. My mother sank slowly onto the edge of the couch like her legs no longer trusted her. "We just needed some time," she said weakly. "Your father and I were exhausted. Everything in this house had become so heavy." I nodded once. "Yes," I said, "it had." She looked at me with wet, bewildered eyes as if I had somehow failed to be sympathetic to the burden of her own absence. My father stepped toward the table and picked up one of the notices. "These payments." "We're late for 3 months," I said, "before you ever boarded a plane." He dropped the paper back onto the stack. "I was handling it." "No," I said, "you were avoiding it." His face reddened. "You don't know everything." I almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You're right," I said. "I only know what I paid. I only know what I signed. I only know what she went through while you were drinking wine in Italy." My mother flinched. My father took one more step toward me. "That's enough." "No," Lily said quietly. All three of us turned toward her. She was sitting a little straighter now, one hand pressed lightly to the blanket over her lap. "That's enough," she repeated, looking at our father. "For once, just let her finish." I had not heard that tone from Lily in years, maybe ever. It seemed to take something out of him. He stopped moving. I reached for the last folder. This one was thinner. "More final." "I was a donor match," I said. My mother blinked. "What?" "For Lily." Neither of them spoke. "I found out while you were gone." My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. My father's voice was lower when it came. "What are you saying?" I held his gaze. "I'm saying the surgery happened 2 weeks ago." My mother made a small broken sound and looked at Lily as if searching her face for contradiction. Lily did not give it. Then my mother looked at me. "At you." Her eyes dropped to the way I was standing, careful without being obvious, one side still protected by instinct. "No," she said again, shaking her head. "No." I set the folder on the table in front of them. Inside were the surgical records, discharge papers, and follow-up instructions. "I gave her my kidney," I said, "while you were gone." My mother pressed both hands to her mouth. My father had gone completely pale. For a moment, neither of them seemed able to connect the room they were standing in with the month they had just lived through. It was all there in front of them, the bed, the machines, the bills, the legal notices, the paperwork, the cost. Not imagined. Not exaggerated. Documented. Real. And then my mother said the words I had heard in my mind long before they ever arrived. No, this can't be happening. But it had happened. That was the thing. It had happened slowly, painfully, one ordinary day at a time while they were far away pretending life had asked too much of them. My father sank into the chair by the window as if all the strength had gone out of him. My mother was crying now, but softly, almost in shock. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I did not need to. Because the truth was sitting in the room with us. Breathing. Recovering. And looking back at them. Nobody said anything for a long time after that. The oxygen machine kept humming. A car passed outside. Somewhere down the block a dog barked once and went quiet again. It struck me then how ordinary the afternoon sounded, even with my mother bent forward on the couch in tears, and my father sitting by the window like a man who had suddenly aged 10 years. That is one of the strangest things about the worst moments in life. The world does not stop to honor them. It just keeps moving. My father was the first one to speak. His voice came out rough. You should have called again. I looked at him, and for one brief second I almost felt tired enough to laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was familiar. There it was, that last thin instinct to reach for a version of events that made him less responsible. Not innocent. He knew better than that now. But less responsible. The kind of sentence people use when the truth is too large to look at directly. You should have called again. You should have explained it differently. You should have made me understand. I leaned one hand against the table, careful of my side. No, I said quietly. You should have come home. He looked at me, and something in his face gave way. Not pride exactly. Something underneath it. My mother lowered her hands from her mouth, though her fingers were still trembling. She looked at Lily first. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered. Oh, honey. Lily did not answer. She wasn't being cruel. She simply didn't seem to have anything left to offer that wasn't earned. My mother turned to me. Why didn't you tell us after the surgery? She asked. I thought about that. There are questions people ask because they want information. And there are questions they ask because they want a bridge back into a room they no longer know how to enter. I answered honestly. Because by then it wasn't information you needed, I said. It was consequences. That landed hard. My mother closed her eyes. My father stared at the papers on the table again as if he might find a version of them that hurt less. There wasn't one. After another long silence, Lily spoke. I really thought you'd come home, she said. She didn't say it loudly. She didn't say it to wound them. That was what made it unbearable. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before, not ordinary crying, not frustration, not even grief exactly. It was closer to shame. We were wrong, she said, voice shaking. We were so wrong. My father stayed still for a few more seconds. Then he stood, not all at once, but slowly, like it cost him effort to be inside his own body. He looked at Lily. Then at me. And finally he said the words I had waited my whole life to hear from him, though I had stopped expecting them years ago. I failed both of you. The room went quiet in a new way after that. I watched his face carefully, looking for the old signs, defensiveness, irritation, the need to explain. They were there at first, flickering around the edges. But they didn't take hold. He looked down at the missed mortgage notices, the hospital invoices, the surgical records. Then he looked at the rented bed in his living room. No, he said again, but this time to himself. No, I failed both of you. My mother moved from the couch to the side of Lily's bed and sank carefully into the chair beside it. Can I sit here? She asked. Lily gave a small nod. My mother reached for her hand but stopped just short, waiting. After a moment, Lily let her take it. That was the first grace offered in that room. Small, fragile, but real. My father turned toward me. What do I do now? He asked. For a second I saw the younger version of him in that question, the man who always wanted the practical next step, the immediate task, the thing that could be fixed with effort, if not feeling. In another season of life that would have irritated me. But age teaches you something about remorse. When it is real, it doesn't come dressed in perfect words. Sometimes it shows up clumsy and late and humiliated, asking what's left to do. So I answered him plainly. You pay what you owe, I said. You stop pretending things fix themselves. You show up, not for an afternoon, not when it's convenient. You stay. He nodded once. Then again. I will. I believed he meant it. That didn't mean I trusted it yet. Those are not the same thing. Over the next week I watched what happened. My father canceled the rest of the travel arrangements they had planned for later that summer. I know because I heard him on the phone in the den, voice flat, saying, "No, we won't be rescheduling." He met with the mortgage company. He sold off an investment account he had been protecting for years and used the money to clear the back balance and bring the house current. He called the billing offices I had been dealing with, and for the first time in his life, let hold music punish him instead of leaving the burden to someone else. My mother changed in quieter ways. She learned Lily's medication schedule by heart. She wrote down blood pressure numbers in a notebook with careful handwriting. She sat through follow-up appointments and took notes without turning away from hard information. Twice I caught her standing in the hallway outside Lily's room late at night, one hand over her mouth, listening to make sure her breathing stayed steady. She cooked again too, simple things at first: soup, toast, soft eggs, the kind of food you make when you are trying to care for someone, not impress them. None of it erased what they had done. That is another thing age teaches you if you are willing to learn it. Real repentance does not erase the wound. It accepts that the wound is there and works anyway. My own recovery moved forward slowly. The pain eased, the stiffness lessened. By the third week I could walk around the block without feeling that deep pull in my side. Lily got stronger too. Color began to return to her face. She started eating more. One afternoon I found her sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a crossword puzzle, and for a second the sight of something so ordinary nearly brought me to tears. I stood in the doorway and watched her. What she asked, smiling a little. "Nothing," I said. "You're doing a crossword." "Well," she said, "I thought I'd start with something ambitious." That made me laugh. A small laugh, but a real one. My mother looked up from the sink when she heard it. She didn't say anything. She just closed her eyes for a brief second, like hearing laughter in the house again was almost more than she could bear. One Sunday afternoon, about a month after my parents came home, we sat on the back porch together. Not because everything had been solved. Because the weather was good, and Lily wanted sunlight and no one argued. My father sat across from me with a glass of iced tea sweating in his hand. He looked older than he had before Europe. Not weaker, just more honest. "I keep thinking about that sentence," he said. "What sentence?" He swallowed. "I'm the one here." I hadn't realized Lily had told him I said that. He nodded toward the house. "She said that's what you told her, over and over." I looked out over the yard. The grass needed cutting. The fence would need staining before winter. Mrs. Donnelly's beagle was barking at squirrels again on the other side of the hedge. "Normal things?" I said. My father nodded, eyes lowered. "I should have been." That was the closest thing to an explanation he ever tried to offer. And maybe it was enough, not because it balanced the scales. It never could. But because it was the truth without decoration. Lily leaned her head back against the porch chair and closed her eyes in the sun. "We're here now," my mother said softly. I looked at her. Her face held no defense in it, just hope and fear and the knowledge that both belonged there. "Yes," I said, "you are." And that was where reconciliation began, not with forgiveness spoken too quickly, not with one dramatic apology, not with tears alone. It began with staying, with paying attention, with learning late in life if necessary that love is not proven by what you feel when things are easy. It is proven by where you stand when things are hard. That is the lesson I carried from all of it. Not that family never fails. They do. Sometimes in ways that cut so deep you wonder if anything honest can grow back. But it can if truth is faced, if pride is laid down, and if people are finally willing to remain where they once ran. So, if this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone you need to call, forgive, thank, or simply sit beside, don't wait for the perfect moment. The older I get, the more I believe this. The people who love us best are not always the ones who speak most beautifully. They are the ones who stay when staying costs them something. If that means something to you, share this story with someone who needs it and stay with us for the next one. The slap echoed louder than the music. For one strange second, nobody in that ballroom moved. Not the caterers carrying silver trays, not the string quartet near the windows, not the 200 guests sitting beneath crystal chandeliers overlooking the Chesapeake Bay. Not even me. I just stood there in my white wedding gown with my head turned sideways from the force of Daniel's hand. My future husband had slapped me in front of everyone, and his mother smiled. I still remember the smell of cigarette smoke floating through the ballroom when it happened. Sharp, bitter, thick enough to sting my lungs. I had only asked politely, "Mrs. Whitmore, would you mind smoking outside? My lungs have been sensitive lately." That was it. I said it softly, respectfully. But Daniel suddenly exploded like a man waiting his entire life for an excuse. "Shut up," he shouted. The entire room froze. "You smell worse than cigarettes." Then came the slap. I heard several women gasp. Someone dropped a champagne glass near the dance floor. My cheek burned instantly, but honestly the pain wasn't what shocked me. It was the humiliation. At 42 years old, after 21 years in the United States Navy, after surviving deployments, toxic smoke exposure overseas, and the deaths of men I respected deeply, I had never felt smaller than I did standing there in my wedding dress. And the worst part, a piece of me wasn't even surprised. Because deep down I think I had spent the last 3 years pretending not to see who Daniel really was. 5 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened, and everything changed. But before I tell you about that moment, you need to understand how I ended up standing at that altar in the first place. My name is Rebecca Lawson. Commander Rebecca Lawson, technically, though most people simply call me Becca. I grew up outside Norfolk, Virginia, in a modest blue-collar family. My father repaired electrical systems at the shipyard, and my mother worked the front desk at a dentist's office for nearly 30 years. We weren't poor, but we counted every dollar. My father believed in 3 things: show up early, work hard, and never complain. The Navy became my path out of a small life. I enlisted at 19. By 25, I was an officer. By 40, I had spent more birthdays overseas than at home. The Navy gave me structure, purpose, and honestly, family. But military life can also leave people lonely in ways civilians don't always understand. Especially women. Especially older women. You spend decades moving from base to base while other people build homes, raise children, host backyard cookouts, and celebrate anniversaries. Meanwhile, you become very good at saying goodbye. I met Daniel Whitmore at a charity fundraiser in Annapolis 4 years before the wedding. He was handsome in that polished East Coast way. Expensive watch, confident smile, tailored Navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. He owned a financial consulting company with his cousin. At first, he made me feel admired. After years around military culture where emotions stayed tightly controlled, Daniel felt warm and charming. He brought flowers, opened doors, held my hand in public, and after enough lonely years, that kind of attention can feel dangerous. Looking back now, the warning signs appeared early, very early. The first time Daniel met my Navy friends, he joked, "So which one of you actually does the fighting?" Everybody laughed politely except me. Then there were little comments. "You'd look prettier if you wore your hair longer." "Do you really need to work this much at your age?" A man wants peace when he comes home, not another commanding officer. Most of those comments came from his mother, Linda Whitmore. Linda belonged to one of those wealthy Maryland families that quietly measured human worth through money, appearances, and social status. She smiled often, but never kindly. The first time I visited their waterfront home, she looked at my uniform photo and said, "Oh my, Rebecca, you've certainly lived an unconventional life." Unconventional. That word stayed with me. Linda believed military women were masculine, aggressive, and unsuitable for marriage. She never said it directly. Women like Linda never do. Instead, they poison slowly. Tiny comments over dinner, passive little insults hidden inside compliments. "You're very impressive for someone with such a stressful career." Daniel has always needed softness in a woman. "I just worry military life makes people emotionally hard." Daniel never defended me, not once. And somehow I kept excusing it. Because loneliness can make intelligent people tolerate things they normally wouldn't. Especially after 40. Especially after years of watching everybody else build families while you unpack another suitcase alone in another temporary apartment. By the time we became engaged, I already knew something felt wrong. But I convinced myself marriage required compromise, patience, understanding. I told myself Linda would eventually warm up to me. I told myself Daniel's temper came from stress. I told myself many lies. The wedding took place in early October at a historic waterfront hotel in Annapolis. Beautiful weather, cool breeze off the water, golden leaves drifting near the marina. Nearly 200 guests attended, including several Navy officers I had served beside for years. Most of them sat quietly toward the back, because Daniel never liked attention focused on my military career. He once told me tonight is about us, not the Navy. Still a few came because they loved me. One of them was Admiral Thomas Avery, a respected 2-star admiral nearing retirement. He had mentored me for nearly 15 years. Truthfully, he was more protective of me than Daniel ever was. The reception started smoothly enough. Dinner, champagne, soft jazz music. Then Linda lit a cigarette near the bridal table, inside the ballroom. I noticed immediately because cigarette smoke still affects my breathing after toxic exposure during a deployment years ago near the Persian Gulf. Most people around me knew that. Linda definitely knew. She exhaled smoke slowly while watching me, almost like a test. I tried ignoring it at first, but after several minutes my chest tightened, so I leaned forward gently and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, would you mind smoking outside? My lungs have been sensitive lately." I smiled when I said it. I truly did. Then Daniel stood up so violently his chair nearly fell backward. "Shut up," he barked. The room went silent. "You smell worse than cigarettes?" And then, the slap. I remember the taste of blood inside my mouth. I remember Linda smiling into her wine glass. I remember hearing one elderly woman whisper, "Oh my God." And then, 5 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened. 12 Navy officers walked inside wearing full dress uniforms, and behind them, Admiral Avery stepped into the room. Daniel's face turned white. The ballroom became so quiet I could hear the water outside hitting the docks below the hotel. 12 Navy officers stood near the entrance in formal dress whites, their medals catching the chandelier light. And behind them stood Admiral Thomas Avery, 6'3", silver-haired, straight posture that somehow made the entire room sit taller the second he entered. I saw several guests immediately recognize the stars on his shoulders. People who had been whispering moments earlier suddenly fell silent. Daniel's face drained of color beside me, because for the first time that evening he realized something important. He had absolutely no idea who I really was. Admiral Avery walked directly toward me without looking at anyone else. Not Daniel, not Linda, not the guests, only me. Every Navy officer in the room stood immediately. A few civilians copied them awkwardly after realizing something serious was happening. The Admiral stopped inches from me and looked carefully at the red mark forming across my cheek. His jaw tightened. "Commander Lawson," he said quietly, "are you all right?" Commander Lawson, not Rebecca, not Becca. My rank, my identity, the one thing I had spent years shrinking to protect Daniel's fragile ego. I swallowed hard before answering. "Yes, sir," but my voice shook slightly. The Admiral noticed. He always noticed. Daniel suddenly forced an uncomfortable laugh. "Admiral Avery, right?" he said, stepping forward too quickly. "I'm Daniel, Rebecca's fiancé." Was. Not fiancé. Not anymore, though I don't think any of us understood that fully yet. The Admiral turned slowly toward him. His expression stayed calm but cold. Very cold. "I'm aware of who you are," he replied. Then his eyes moved briefly toward my cheek again. That silence lasted maybe 3 seconds, but it felt like 3 hours. Behind the Admiral, I noticed Commander Elise Monroe standing near the entrance. We had served together overseas years earlier. Beside her stood Captain Raymond Brooks, one of the sharpest logistics officers I'd ever known. These weren't random guests. These were respected officers. People who had spent decades serving this country, and every one of them had just witnessed Daniel slap me. Linda finally spoke, her voice syrupy and fake. "Oh dear, I'm sure this is all just wedding stress." Nobody answered her, not even Daniel. The Admiral looked back at me. "Would you like to step outside for some air, Commander?" The truth is, at that moment I wanted to disappear. Not because of the slap, but because I suddenly saw my entire life from the outside. A 42-year-old Navy commander standing in a ballroom beside a man who had publicly humiliated her. And somehow I had almost married him. I nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." As we started walking, Daniel grabbed my wrist. Not hard, but possessively. "Rebecca," he hissed quietly, "don't make this dramatic." Something inside me shifted when he said that. Because my humiliation wasn't the problem to him. His embarrassment was. I gently pulled my hand away. And for the first time in years, I stopped trying to soothe him. The hotel balcony overlooked the harbor. Boats rocked quietly in the dark water below while cold October wind swept across the marina. Admiral Avery stood beside me near the railing. For a while neither of us spoke. Then he said softly, "I should have said something sooner." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He folded his hands behind his back. "The way that man talks to you." I stared out at the water. "He's not always like that." The Admiral gave me a look older people recognize immediately. The look that says, "Please don't lie to yourself in front of me." Rebecca, he said gently, I've known you 15 years, and that was true. Thomas Avery had watched me grow from a nervous young lieutenant into a commander trusted during international evacuation operations. He knew me better than most people ever had. He knew about the deployment that damaged my lungs. Kuwait, oil fire smoke and chemical exposure after an attack near one of our temporary operational sites. I spent weeks coughing blood afterward. The Navy covered my treatments quietly, but the damage never fully disappeared. Certain smoke still triggered breathing problems, like cigarette smoke. Linda knew that. Daniel knew that too. Neither cared. You know what bothers me most, I finally whispered. The Admiral waited. I wasn't shocked when he hit me. Saying the words out loud made my stomach twist. Not shocked. Because somewhere deep inside, I think I had spent years preparing emotionally for the day Daniel's temper crossed that line. It hadn't started physically. Men like Daniel rarely begin there. First comes the disrespect, the sarcasm, the small humiliations disguised as jokes. Then isolation. Then emotional control. Then one day the line disappears. I closed my eyes briefly. There were signs, I admitted. The Admiral nodded once. Yes. And strangely, hearing somebody confirm it brought relief instead of shame. Because older women especially are taught to explain away bad behavior. He's stressed. He didn't mean it. He had a rough childhood. You know how men are. But deep down, most women know. I certainly did. I remembered the first deployment Daniel mocked. I had just returned from coordinating civilian evacuations during a dangerous operation overseas. 3 straight days with almost no sleep. I was exhausted, emotionally drained. When I told him how difficult it had been watching terrified families board transport aircraft, he rolled his eyes and said, "You military people always act like you're saving the world." Another time he complained because I missed one of his business dinners during an emergency briefing at the Pentagon. "You care more about strangers than your own relationship," he snapped. At the time I apologized. God help me. I apologized. The Admiral leaned slightly against the railing beside me. "You know why your officers respect you?" he asked. I shook my head faintly. "Because you protect people under pressure." His voice stayed calm. "You walk into chaos and make others feel safe." I looked down at my wedding ring. Suddenly it felt heavy, embarrassing, like a symbol of every compromise I made against my own instincts. Inside the ballroom, music had completely stopped now. Guests were murmuring nervously. I could see silhouettes moving near the windows, watching. The Admiral turned toward me fully. "Commander," he asked carefully, "do you want us to stay?" Not forcefully. Not controlling. Just support. Real support. And for the first time all evening, I realized I didn't want Daniel comforting me. I didn't even want him near me. Slowly, I slid the wedding ring off my finger. My hands trembled slightly from adrenaline. Then I looked back toward the ballroom doors, toward the man who slapped me in front of 200 people. And I finally understood something that took me 42 years to learn. Loneliness had made me tolerate things self-respect never should have allowed. I closed my hand around the ring. Then I answered softly, "Yes, sir." The moment I walked back into that ballroom without my wedding ring on, people knew. Nobody needed an announcement. Nobody needed explanations. At my age, you learn people can sense when something permanent has broken. The string quartet had stopped playing completely. Champagne glasses sat untouched on tables. Even the hotel staff looked nervous. Daniel stood near the center of the dance floor, trying desperately to appear calm, while sweat gathered along his forehead. His mother stood beside him, clutching her cigarette with stiff fingers, though she had finally stopped smoking after several guests glared at her. The second Daniel saw me returning with Admiral Avery and the other officers behind me, his expression shifted. The anger disappeared. Now came charm, manipulation, damage control. "Baby," he said quickly, forcing a laugh, "come on, don't embarrass me like this." Embarrass him. That phrase settled into my chest heavier than the slap itself. Not "are you okay?" Not "I'm sorry." Not even I lost control. Just fear about himself. His image. His reputation. I looked around the ballroom slowly. 200 people watching. Some uncomfortable. Some angry. Some pretending not to stare. And suddenly I felt strangely calm. For years I had feared public humiliation. Feared becoming the older woman people whispered about. Feared failed relationships. Feared ending up alone. But standing there in front of everybody, something unexpected happened. I stopped being afraid. Linda stepped forward with a brittle smile. "Rebecca," she said sweetly, "you're upset right now. Let's not ruin the evening over one little misunderstanding." One little misunderstanding. That woman could have watched a house burn down and still called it an unfortunate inconvenience. I looked directly at her for the first time without trying to earn her approval. "You smiled when he hit me," I said quietly. Her expression twitched. Only slightly. But enough. Daniel immediately interrupted. Oh my God, Rebecca, stop making this dramatic. That word again. Dramatic. Funny how people always call women dramatic when women finally stop accepting disrespect. I took a slow breath. Then I heard my own voice say something I never imagined saying at my wedding. The wedding is over. Complete silence. Somebody near the back gasped softly. Daniel blinked at me like he genuinely thought he'd misunderstood. What? The wedding, I repeated calmly, is over. Linda laughed once in disbelief. Oh, don't be ridiculous. But I wasn't speaking emotionally anymore. That frightened them more than tears would have. I reached down and placed my wedding ring gently on the bridal table beside the flower centerpiece. No throwing, no screaming, no scene. Just finality. Daniel's face darkened instantly. You're seriously doing this, he hissed. I met his eyes steadily. You slapped me in front of 200 people. You provoked me. There it was. The sentence almost every abusive man eventually says. You provoked me. Several guests visibly reacted to that, especially the older women. I noticed one elderly woman at table 7 slowly shaking her head with visible disgust. Her husband leaned toward Daniel and said quietly but firmly, Son, a real man never hits a woman. Daniel ignored him completely, because men like Daniel never listen once their ego takes over. They only escalate. You think you're perfect? He snapped at me now. You think everybody here doesn't know how cold you are? I stayed silent. He stepped closer. You care more about your Navy career than relationships? Everybody knows it. I almost answered defensively out of habit. Years of habit. Years of explaining myself. But then something inside me simply stopped. Because suddenly I understood no explanation would ever be enough for someone determined to diminish me. The Admiral stepped slightly forward beside me. Not aggressively. Just enough. Daniel noticed immediately. And for the first time all evening I saw fear flicker across his face. Not guilt. Fear. Because now the room no longer saw him as the successful, charming businessman. Now they saw what he truly was, a man who struck his bride in public. And people over 60 especially understand something younger generations sometimes forget. Character eventually reveals itself under pressure. Always. Daniel lowered his voice. Rebecca, he muttered, please don't destroy everything over one mistake. Destroy everything. Again, not concern for me. Concern for himself. His lifestyle. His image. His future. And suddenly I saw our entire relationship clearly. The luxury dinners. The country club parties. The polished photos online. The expensive vacations. Underneath all of it sat one simple truth. Daniel needed admiration more than love. And I had spent years trying to become smaller so he could feel bigger. I looked around the ballroom one last time. The cake. The flowers. The orchestra. Thousands of dollars spent on a wedding that suddenly felt like theater. Then my eyes landed on Commander Elise Monroe near the entrance. She gave me the smallest nod. Not pity. Respect. That nearly broke me emotionally. Because I realized I had received more genuine support from fellow officers than from the man I was about to marry. Daniel reached toward me again. This time I stepped back before he touched me. The movement shocked him. Because I had spent years accommodating him automatically. Apologizing automatically. Softening automatically. Not anymore. I'm leaving, I said calmly. Linda scoffed loudly. Oh, please. Where exactly are you going to go at your age? That sentence hit hard. Not because it was true. Because it revealed exactly how she viewed women. As people who should tolerate misery rather than face solitude. I looked at her steadily. At my age, I said quietly, peace matters more than appearances. For the first time all evening, Linda had no response. I bent down, slipped off my high heels and held them in one hand. The marble floor felt cold beneath my feet as I walked toward the ballroom exit. And strangely, every step felt lighter. Behind me I heard Daniel calling my name. Then louder. Then angrily. But I kept walking. The Navy officers walked beside me silently as we moved through the hotel hallway. Nobody rushed me. Nobody pressured me. Outside, cold autumn air hit my face. I inhaled deeply. And for the first time in years, breathing felt easier than it had inside that ballroom. Then suddenly flashing red and blue lights reflected across the hotel windows. 3 police cruisers pulled into the circular driveway. Daniel stepped outside behind us just as 2 officers exited their vehicles. And the look on his face told me something important. For the first time that night, he understood actions had consequences. The police officers entered the hotel lobby with the calm expression people develop after years of handling domestic disturbances. Steady, professional, unemotional. But the moment Daniel saw them approaching, his confidence cracked. Are you serious right now? He snapped loudly, looking around the crowd. Who called the police? Nobody answered him. One of the officers, a gray-haired sergeant who looked close to retirement age himself, stepped forward calmly. "Sir, we received reports of an assault." Daniel immediately pointed toward me. "She's blowing this out of proportion." Out of proportion. Funny phrase. As if being struck in front of 200 people was a misunderstanding over dinner reservations. The officer looked at me gently. "Ma'am, are you injured?" My cheek still burned. But emotionally I felt strangely detached now, almost exhausted. "I'm all right," I answered quietly. Before Daniel could speak again, a woman near the hotel entrance raised her phone. "I recorded it," she said firmly. Another guest lifted his hand. "So did I." Then another voice. "I saw the whole thing." The atmosphere shifted instantly, because public humiliation works both ways. Daniel had slapped me publicly. Now witnesses existed publicly too. Linda suddenly stepped forward wearing that same polished social smile. "Officers, surely we can handle this privately. Emotions are high tonight." The older sergeant looked at her for about 2 seconds before replying, "Ma'am, assault is assault. Simple. Direct. No performance." Daniel ran both hands through his hair aggressively. "Oh my God," he muttered, "this is insane." But deep down I think he already understood something important. His usual charm wasn't working anymore. Men like Daniel survive through image management, confidence, control. But once enough people witness the truth simultaneously, the mask collapses fast. One officer quietly asked whether I wanted to file an official complaint. I hesitated. Not because I doubted what happened. Because older generations, especially women my age, were raised to avoid becoming the reason for public scandal. Even after being hurt. Even after humiliation. We were trained to preserve peace at our own expense. Admiral Avery spoke quietly beside me. "You don't owe anybody silence." That sentence settled deeply into me. You don't owe anybody silence. For years I had confused endurance with strength. But they aren't the same thing. Not even close. I finally nodded. "Yes," I said softly, "I'd like to make a statement." Daniel stared at me like I had betrayed him. Not because he regretted hurting me, because consequences had arrived. So, an hour later most guests had quietly left the hotel. The wedding reception had dissolved into scattered flower petals, abandoned champagne glasses, and exhausted staff members cleaning tables beneath dimmed chandeliers. I sat in a private conference room with a police officer taking my statement while Admiral Avery waited outside. The female officer interviewing me appeared somewhere in her late 50s. Calm eyes. Wedding ring. Gentle voice. When I finished speaking, she closed her notebook slowly and asked, "Has he ever put his hands on you before?" I stared down at the table. "No." Then after a pause, "Not exactly." She waited carefully. There were other things, I admitted quietly. I began describing moments I had buried for years. Daniel grabbing my arm too tightly during arguments, blocking doorways, punching walls, mocking my military service, calling me cold, unfeminine, emotionally damaged. The officer listened without interruption. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "I've heard stories like this for 30 years, she said gently. "It almost always starts long before the first slap." That sentence stayed with me. Because she was right. The slap wasn't the beginning. It was the reveal. Over the next several days, the fallout spread quickly through Annapolis social circles. Somebody leaked one of the wedding videos online. Not the slap itself at first. Just the aftermath. Daniel shouting. Me standing silently. Navy officers surrounding the situation. Then eventually the actual video surfaced. I never watched it. I couldn't. But others did. Thousands of others. Veterans groups began sharing outrage online after learning Daniel had struck a senior Navy officer during her wedding reception. Several local news stations contacted the hotel asking questions. Daniel's business partners stopped returning his calls. One investor publicly withdrew from an upcoming development project. And suddenly the same wealthy people who once adored Daniel started distancing themselves quietly. That's another thing older people understand well. Many social circles are built entirely on convenience. Not loyalty. Convenience. Linda called me 3 days later. I almost ignored it. But curiosity won. The second I answered, she sighed dramatically. "Rebecca," she said, "haven't we all suffered enough?" Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "How are you holding up?" Just concern about discomfort. I closed my eyes briefly. "Your son hit me. He was emotional. He assaulted me." Linda's voice hardened immediately. "You humiliated him in front of everyone." There it was again. Not concern for morality. Concern for image. I suddenly understood something chilling about that family. They didn't measure right versus wrong, only embarrassment versus convenience. Before hanging up, Linda said one final thing. "You never knew how to let a man feel respected." I almost laughed. Because for years I had sacrificed pieces of myself trying to protect Daniel's ego, and it still wasn't enough. Nothing ever would have been. A week later, I drove to visit Margaret Holloway, retired Navy widow, 78 years old, sharp-minded, blunt. She had mentored countless younger military women over the decades, including me. Margaret lived alone in a quiet cottage outside Norfolk with an old golden retriever named Charlie sleeping near the fireplace. She poured coffee into 2 mugs while I explained everything. Not once did she interrupt. When I finally finished, she leaned back slowly in her chair. "Loneliness," she said softly, "can make strong women tolerate weak love." I stared at my coffee silently, because that sentence hit too close to the truth. Margaret studied me carefully. "You spent your whole adult life being needed," she continued. "That kind of life can make being chosen feel more important than being respected." I felt tears threaten my eyes for the first time since the wedding. Not from humiliation anymore, from recognition. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "Rebecca," she said, "peace is not loneliness." That sentence changed something inside me, because maybe I had confused the two for years. When I left Margaret's cottage that evening, the sky had already turned dark over the water. I sat inside my car for several minutes before starting the engine. Then my phone rang. "Daniel." I almost declined the call, but something told me to answer. His voice sounded different immediately, less arrogant, more desperate. "There's something you don't know," he said quietly. I frowned. "What are you talking about?" A long silence followed. Then he said, "It's about your father." I didn't speak for several seconds after Daniel mentioned my father. The line stayed quiet except for faint traffic noise somewhere behind him. "What about my father?" I finally asked. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Can we meet in person?" Every instinct told me not to. But another part of me, the same part that had spent years searching for closure in broken places, needed answers. We agreed to meet the next afternoon at a quiet seafood restaurant overlooking the marina in Annapolis. The kind of place older couples visit after church on Sundays. Simple white tablecloths, lemon water, soft Frank Sinatra playing through ceiling speakers. When I arrived, Daniel was already seated in a corner booth. And honestly, he looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, wrinkled shirt, no confidence, no polished businessman charm. Just a tired man watching his life unravel. For a brief moment I almost pitied him. Then I remembered his hand across my face, the humiliation, Linda smiling, and the feeling disappeared. Daniel stood awkwardly when I approached. "Thanks for coming." I sat down carefully across from him. "What about my father?" He rubbed his hands together nervously. "I didn't want to tell you this before the wedding." "Tell me what?" He hesitated, then finally said, "Linda hired a private investigator after we got engaged." I stared at him. My stomach tightened immediately. "She became obsessed with your family background," he continued quietly. "She thought your father had hidden debts or gambling problems." I felt anger rise slowly through my chest. "My father worked 38 years in a shipyard," I said coldly. "He died with less than $500 in his checking account." "I know. Then why investigate him?" Daniel looked down at the table. "Because my mother believes poor people are dangerous." The sentence didn't even shock me anymore. It simply confirmed everything I already knew. Daniel swallowed hard. "The investigator found medical records from years ago." I frowned slightly. "What records?" He looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "Your father knew your lung damage was getting worse after your deployment." My chest tightened. "What are you talking about?" Daniel leaned forward carefully. "He tried contacting specialists before he died." I stared at him silently, because suddenly memories returned. My father insisting I stop ignoring my coughing. My father asking questions about military hospitals. My father sounding worried during phone calls I barely had time to answer. At the time I thought he was simply being protective. But apparently, it was more than that, Daniel continued quietly. "He spent most of his retirement savings trying to find treatment options for you." I looked away toward the harbor windows. My father had died 3 years earlier from a heart attack. We never got to have one final meaningful conversation. Military life stole too many of those chances. I swallowed carefully. "Why are you telling me this now?" Daniel's answer came too quickly. "Because I don't want you thinking I'm a monster." There it was. Not remorse. Self-preservation. Again. I looked back at him steadily. "You slapped me in public." His jaw tightened. "You humiliated my mother." I almost laughed at the insanity of that sentence. I asked her not to smoke near my damaged lungs. "She's old-fashioned. She's cruel." Daniel's eyes hardened slightly. "You always hated her." "No," I said calmly. "I spent years trying to earn approval she never intended to give." That shut him up briefly. The waitress arrived with coffee neither of us touched. Outside sailboats drifted quietly through gray afternoon water. Finally Daniel leaned back heavily. You know what your problem is, Rebecca? I almost smiled. There it was. The real Daniel returning. My problem. You make people feel small. The sentence lingered between us. And suddenly, I understood him completely. Not just his anger, his resentment, his insecurity, everything. Daniel had never truly loved my strength. He loved being associated with it. The uniform, the status, the discipline, the admiration people showed me. But privately, my accomplishments made him feel inadequate. You know what's ironic? I asked quietly. He frowned. I spent years making myself smaller so you could feel bigger. Daniel looked away immediately, because he knew it was true. I continued softly. I apologized for my career, my deployments, my responsibilities, my schedule, my promotions. You were never home, he muttered defensively. I was serving my country. You always chose work first. That sentence used to hurt me deeply. Not anymore. Because older age brings clarity, younger people sometimes lack. People who truly love you don't punish you for your purpose. They honor it. Daniel suddenly leaned forward again. You think another man's going to want this life? He asked bitterly. A woman in her 40s with health problems and military baggage. For years, words like that would have shattered me. Not now, because something inside me had fundamentally changed since the wedding. I no longer feared being alone more than being disrespected. And that changes everything. I stood slowly from the booth. Daniel looked startled. That's it? He asked. I nodded calmly. Yes. You're just walking away. I looked down at him quietly. You already walked away the moment you raised your hand. For once he had no clever response. No manipulation. No charm. Just silence. I left money on the table for my untouched coffee and walked toward the exit. But before I reached the door, Daniel called after me one last time. Rebecca. I turned slightly. And for the first time since I met him, he looked small. Not financially. Not socially. Spiritually. Emotionally. Just small. I did love you, he said quietly. I believed he thought that was true. But love without respect eventually becomes possession. And possession becomes resentment. I gave him a small nod. Then I walked out into the cold harbor air without looking back. Over the following weeks, the consequences continued spreading through Daniel's life. Several investors pulled out of his business ventures completely. The wedding video kept circulating online. Not viral nationwide, but enough. Enough for local damage, enough for whispers at country clubs, enough for people to quietly avoid invitations involving the Whitmore family. 2 former employees even contacted investigators regarding questionable financial practices tied to Daniel's company. Apparently, public exposure has a way of loosening old secrets. Linda reportedly blamed me for all of it. Of course she did. People like Linda never see consequences as the result of behavior, only betrayal. But strangely, none of it brought me satisfaction. Not real satisfaction. Because revenge, I learned, is rarely as healing as freedom. And freedom finally began arriving quietly in my life. Then one afternoon, nearly a month after the wedding disaster, I received a formal envelope from the Navy. Inside was an invitation. A retirement ceremony. Mine. After 21 years of service, the Navy planned to honor my career publicly in Norfolk. I stared at the invitation for a long time. And honestly, part of me considered not going at all. I almost didn't attend my own retirement ceremony. That probably sounds strange after spending 21 years in the Navy, but the truth is, I was tired. Not physically. Spiritually. The wedding disaster had drained something deep inside me. For weeks afterward, I moved through life quietly. I stayed off social media, ignored gossip, avoided unnecessary phone calls. I spent most mornings sitting on the small balcony of my temporary apartment near Norfolk Harbor, drinking coffee while cargo ships moved slowly through the gray Atlantic fog. And for the first time in decades, silence no longer frightened me. It comforted me. That realization alone changed my life, because for years I had mistaken noise for love, attention for connection, endurance for loyalty. The retirement ceremony was scheduled for a Friday afternoon at Naval Station Norfolk. Simple, traditional, respectful. Exactly the kind of ceremony older military officers appreciate. No unnecessary spectacle, just honor. I almost called to cancel twice that week. Part of me didn't feel worthy anymore after everything that happened. Funny how humiliation works. Even when somebody else hurts you, shame still tries attaching itself to your identity. But on the morning of the ceremony, I received a voicemail from Admiral Avery. Commander Lawson, he said warmly, you showed up for this country for 21 years. Let the Navy show up for you today. So I went. The October air carried that crisp coastal chill Virginia gets near the water. I wore my full-dress white uniform carefully for what would likely be the last official time. Every ribbon, every medal, every insignia polished perfectly. When I looked in the mirror before leaving home, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked weak, because I finally looked honest. No pretending, no shrinking, no apologizing, just me. The ceremony took place inside a modest naval auditorium overlooking the base. Rows of chairs slowly filled with officers, sailors, retired veterans, civilian staff, and a few close friends. Commander Elise Monroe sat near the front. Margaret Holloway came too, walking slowly with a cane beside her golden retriever service dog. Even seeing her there nearly brought tears to my eyes. And then something unexpected happened. People kept approaching me. Young officers, junior sailors, women especially, one after another. A lieutenant shook my hand and said, "You were the first female commander I ever saw leading overseas operations." A young communications officer quietly admitted, "You made me stay in the Navy when I thought I couldn't handle it anymore." Another woman said, "Thank you for proving women don't have to become smaller to lead." I stood there speechless, because for weeks I had focused only on what I lost. The marriage, the illusion, the future I thought I wanted. But I forgot something important. My life had mattered long before Daniel Whitmore entered it, and it would continue mattering after him too. The ceremony itself remained beautifully simple. Admiral Avery delivered the official remarks. He spoke about service, sacrifice, leadership under pressure. Then unexpectedly he paused and looked directly toward me. "There are officers who perform their duties," he said calmly. "And then there are officers who quietly carry other people through difficult seasons of life." The room stayed completely silent. Commander Rebecca Lawson spent 21 years protecting people under pressure without ever asking for recognition. I lowered my eyes briefly, because after everything that happened, being seen kindly again felt overwhelming. The Admiral continued, "She represents something increasingly rare in this world, steady character." That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Steady character. Not perfection, not toughness, not achievement. Character. The audience stood for applause when the ceremony ended. Long, warm, sincere. And suddenly I realized something beautiful. The slap at my wedding had not destroyed my dignity. It revealed who never deserved access to it. A few months later, my life looked very different. Quieter. Smaller in some ways. Better in others. I bought a modest little waterfront cottage outside Norfolk with pale blue shutters and an old wooden porch facing the bay. Nothing extravagant. Just peaceful. I planted tomatoes in the backyard. Started taking slow evening walks again. Sometimes I sat near the marina for hours simply watching gulls circle above the water. No chaos. No criticism. No tension waiting beneath conversations. Just peace. And after years inside military structures and emotionally exhausting relationships, peace felt almost sacred. Daniel tried contacting me twice after the retirement ceremony. I never answered. Not from anger, from closure. There was nothing left to discuss. I later heard his business continued struggling after several investigations into financial misconduct expanded. Linda apparently blamed everyone except herself. But honestly, I stopped caring. That surprised me most of all, because true healing begins the moment revenge stops feeling important. I still think about that wedding sometimes, the music stopping, the slap, the humiliation, the stunned faces around the ballroom. But strangely, those memories no longer feel like the ending of my story. They feel like the beginning of my freedom. And maybe that's the lesson I carry forward now. Sometimes life humiliates us publicly because we ignored private truths for too long. Pain has a way of forcing honesty into places comfort once protected. If you're listening to my story today while sitting in a quiet house, or recovering from heartbreak, or wondering whether peace is still possible later in life, please hear this from someone who learned it the hard way. It is never too late to stop abandoning yourself. Not at 40, not at 60, not ever. And if this story meant something to you, if part of it reminded you of your own life, your own strength, or your own second chance, I hope you'll share it with someone who may need that reminder too. Sometimes, one story can help another person finally choose themselves. The folder slid across the Christmas table so softly it almost made no sound at all. Daniel's mother pushed it with 2 fingers right between the dish of candied yams and the basket of dinner rolls, as if she were offering me something polite. Her smile stayed in place, neat and cold. "We think this is best," she said, "before the wedding moves forward." For a second, nobody moved. The lights on the tree in the corner blinked red gold, red gold. Somewhere in the kitchen, a timer ticked. Daniel looked down at his plate. His father folded his hands like this was a business meeting instead of Christmas dinner. His sister took a sip of wine and tried not to look interested. I rested my hand on the folder but did not open it right away. Even before I saw the title on the first page, I knew what it was. A contract. Not the kind people use when they want fairness, the kind they use when they want to remind you where they think you belong. By then, I had spent nearly 20 years in the Marine Corps. I had stood in rooms where generals made decisions that carried the weight of life and death. I had buried good men. I had written letters to families. I had learned how power worked, and more important, how small people acted when they believed someone else had none. Still sitting at that Christmas table in my oldest wool coat, I felt something sharper than anger. Not because of the paper. Because Daniel had known. I could see it in the way he would not lift his eyes. That was the moment. That was the night. That was the second I understood that before I married this man, I needed to decide whether love was enough when courage was missing. But that was not where the story began. It began 3 weeks earlier on a gray December morning with Daniel standing in my kitchen holding a mug of coffee and smiling at me like the world was still simple. "I want you to come to Christmas dinner," he said. "My parents are finally ready to meet you properly." I was standing at the counter in stocking feet reading an early briefing packet before heading to base. The townhouse I owned in a quiet neighborhood outside Quantico was warm, plain, and tidy. No expensive art, no dramatic furniture, no sign to an ordinary eye that the woman living there earned a solid military salary and carried a rank most men twice her age never reached. I kept my life that way on purpose. Daniel thought I worked in an administrative office connected to the base. He had never said the word clerk with disrespect. In fact, he always said it kindly, as though he admired that I was steady and unpretentious. He believed I handled paperwork reports, scheduling, something small, something quiet. I had let him believe that. Not because I enjoyed deceit, I did not. But after years of being saluted, deferred to, studied, and judged by rank, I had grown hungry for the one thing authority never seemed to bring me: unguarded affection. I wanted one person in my life who saw me before he saw the stars on my collar. So I had never corrected him. I was 38 years old, a major general in the United States Marine Corps with responsibilities that would have startled him if he had known them all. My monthly pay was a little over $18,000 before taxes and deductions. I had my own home, my own retirement, my own investments, and enough savings that I could have walked away from the service tomorrow and lived modestly for the rest of my life. But none of that interested me half as much as character did. "Properly?" I asked. Daniel laughed. "You know what I mean." I looked up from the packet. I thought I'd already met them properly. "You met them at that fundraiser for 10 minutes and my mother was distracted," he said. "This will be different. Just family, Christmas, relaxed." I remember the little pause I took before answering. Daniel noticed it too. "What?" he asked. "Your mother didn't seem distracted," I said. "She seemed disappointed." He gave me that helpless half-smile of his, the one meant to smooth over discomfort without ever truly facing it. "She just doesn't know you yet." That was Daniel's way. He was a good man in many of the daily, ordinary senses. He remembered how I took my coffee. He checked the oil in my car without telling me. He took his suit jackets to the dry cleaner on time and sent flowers to widows from church. He called his aunt every Sunday. He would bring in my grocery bags without being asked. But Daniel had been raised in a family where keeping the peace mattered more than speaking plain truth. Around his parents especially, he softened himself into someone smaller. He did not lie exactly. He just let things go unchallenged until they hardened into facts. "When is dinner?" I asked. "Christmas Eve," he said. "My sister and her husband will be there too." I set down the packet and turned fully toward him. "And what exactly have you told them about me?" His eyebrows lifted too quickly. "That you work on base." "That's all." He shrugged, more or less. It would have been easy then to tell him. To say, "Daniel, I am not an office clerk. I am a Marine Corps Major General, and if your parents want to know whether I can support myself, the answer is yes." But something in me resisted. Not pride, curiosity. By then, I had spent enough time around wealth, real wealth inherited, wealth, anxious wealth, to know that many people were not measured by what they had, but by how they treated those who seemed to have less. Daniel's family came from old East Coast comfort. Not dynastic riches, but the sort of money that lived in country club memberships, careful haircuts, and a belief that family reputation had to be protected from embarrassment. I had watched women like his mother my whole life, sweet voice, sharp eyes, generous in public, exacting in private. And I suddenly knew I wanted to see something clearly before I married her son. "All right," I said, "I'll come." He smiled with relief and came over to kiss my forehead. "You'll see, it'll be nice." I smiled back, but I did not answer. After he left for work, I stood alone in the kitchen for a long moment, the packet forgotten my coffee cooling in my hand. Then I went upstairs, opened my closet, and looked past the tailored coats and good wool dresses I wore for formal military functions when appropriate. I chose the oldest coat I owned. Brown wool. Still decent, but worn thin at the cuffs. A coat my mother would have called respectable, and other women might have called tired. My mother had raised me in a small town in North Carolina. My father died when I was young, and my mother worked in the county records office for 26 years, wearing sensible shoes, and keeping every receipt in an envelope marked by month. She used to tell me, a person with good character doesn't need to announce herself. The world will eventually do the announcing for her. She also used to say, if you really want to know who people are, let them think you can't do a thing for them. I heard her voice that morning as clear as church bells. So I made a decision. I would go to Christmas dinner dressed plainly. No jewelry beyond my watch. No polished authority, no hints. I would keep my voice soft, answer briefly, and let them decide who I was. Not because I wanted revenge. Not yet. Because I wanted truth. The weeks before Christmas passed in the usual blur of duty and December obligations. There were ceremonies, budget meetings, personnel reviews, and the annual ache that settles over military communities during the holidays, when everyone is mindful of who is deployed, who is grieving, who is coming home, and who is not. In public, I carried myself as I always did, calm, direct, self-contained. On base, people stood when I entered a room. Men twice my age chose their words carefully around me. In one afternoon, I might approve travel review, a disciplinary recommendation, and call the widow of a staff officer. By evening, I was home watering a small fern near my living room window and heating soup on the stove. It suited me. Daniel came by often. We decorated my little artificial Christmas tree one Sunday afternoon. He brought peppermint bark from a local shop. He talked about his office Christmas party, his niece's choir concert, his mother's obsession with the table setting this year. She has special china she only uses on Christmas Eve, he said. My dad carves the ham like it's a ceremony. Sounds lovely, I said. He hesitated. You're nervous? No, I said. I'm observant. He laughed, but something in his face tightened. A few nights later, he was flipping through channels in my living room when he said too casually, "If my parents ask about your future, don't take it personally." I looked over from the armchair where I was mending a loose button on a cardigan. What does that mean? You know, they're practical people. Practical about what? He shifted. Marriage, finances, stability. I threaded the needle slowly. Daniel, do your parents think I'm unstable? No, he sat up. Not unstable, just they like to know where things stand. That was the second warning. Enough that any sensible woman would have pressed harder. I did not. I only nodded and kept sewing. The afternoon of Christmas Eve was bright and cold. I dressed carefully in the role I had chosen. Dark skirt, plain blouse, low heels, my oldest coat, no earrings, no makeup beyond what was necessary not to look tired. I pinned my hair simply and left it that way. When I looked in the mirror, I saw exactly what I wanted them to see. A quiet woman, pleasant enough, forgettable if you were foolish. Daniel picked me up just before 5. He was wearing a navy sweater and looked handsome in the open, earnest way that had first drawn me to him. He carried a pie I had baked and complimented my coat, which told me he truly did not see what I was doing. On the drive to his parents' house, Christmas lights glowed across front porches and shrubs. Maryland suburbs at Christmas time have a particular kind of order to them, wreaths on every other door, neat lawns gone brown for winter candles glowing in front windows, the feeling that people are trying very hard to produce warmth on schedule. Daniel reached over and touched my hand. Thank you for doing this. Of course, I said. You'll like them more once you know them. I turned my face toward the passing dark outside the window. Maybe. Their house stood at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, large without being vulgar. White columns, green shutters, brass lantern by the door. The sort of place that had hosted many holidays and wanted you to notice it had done so successfully. Daniel parked in the driveway. Through the front window, I could see the glow of a tall tree and the movement of figures inside. I took one breath, then another. Not because I was afraid of them, because I knew with the strange stillness that sometimes comes before a storm that this night was going to tell me something final. Daniel came around to open my door pie in one hand, smile in place. I stepped out, buttoned my old coat against the cold, and walked with him to the front porch. From inside I could already hear laughter. Then the door opened. The woman who opened the door smiled the way people do when they've already made up their mind. "Daniel," she said warmly, leaning in to kiss his cheek. Then her eyes moved to me, quick and measuring. "And this must be... you." Her voice lingered on the last word just a fraction too long. "Mom, this is Daniel," began. "I remember," she said, cutting him off gently. "We met briefly." She stepped aside to let us in. The house was exactly what I expected: polished hardwood floors, a tall Christmas tree dressed in gold and glass, the faint scent of cinnamon and baked ham in the air. Everything was arranged just so the way people arrange a life they want others to admire. "Take your coat," she said, reaching for mine. I hesitated for the smallest moment, then let her. Her fingers brushed the sleeve, and I saw it, the almost invisible flicker in her expression when she felt the worn wool. Not disgust, not quite. Just confirmation. She hung it carefully as though it might shed. "This way," she said. We moved into the living room where Daniel's father stood near the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel. He was a tall man in his 70s, straight-backed, with the kind of posture that comes from a lifetime of believing he has earned his place in every room. "Dad," Daniel said, "this is..." "Yes, yes," his father replied, extending his hand to me. "Welcome." His grip was firm, his smile practiced. His eyes, like his wife's, did their work quickly, taking in my clothes, my shoes, my posture. "Good to finally have you here," he added. "Thank you for inviting me," I said. Behind him, a younger woman approached, carrying a glass of wine, Daniel's sister. She was dressed beautifully, her hair done, her smile bright in a way that felt rehearsed. "So this is the mystery woman," she said lightly. "I've heard so much." I doubted that. Her husband followed a step behind, quieter, observing. "Can I get you something to drink?" Daniel's mother asked. "Water would be fine," I said. "Just water," the sister asked, a hint of amusement in her voice. "It's Christmas." "I'm driving later," I said. That wasn't entirely true, but it was simple. His mother returned with a glass of water and handed it to me with careful politeness. "Dinner will be ready in a few minutes. Why don't we sit?" We moved into the living room. Conversation began easily enough, but not naturally. Questions came my way, but they were shaped in a certain direction. "So Daniel tells us you work on base," his father said, settling into his chair. "Yes," I said. "What kind of work?" he asked. "Administrative," I answered. He nodded slowly, as if placing that into a category he understood completely. "That must be steady," he said. "It is," I replied. His sister leaned forward slightly. "Do you enjoy it?" "I value the structure," I said. That seemed to satisfy her, or at least confirm whatever she had already decided. Daniel tried to keep the conversation moving. He talked about work, about a project he was finishing, about a trip they might take in the spring. His mother listened, smiling at him, nodding her attention warm and full when it rested on her son. When it returned to me, it cooled. "And your family?" she asked. "My mother passed a few years ago," I said. "I don't have any siblings." "Oh," she said softly, tilting her head. "That must be difficult." "It was," I said. There was a pause, not of sympathy, of recalibration. Less family, less support, less structure. His father cleared his throat. "Well, it's good you have Daniel now." I took a sip of water. "Yes," I said evenly. "It is." Dinner was announced a moment later, and we moved into the dining room. The table was set beautifully. White china with a delicate gold rim. Crystal glasses. Cloth napkins folded just so. A centerpiece of pine branches and candles. It was the kind of table my mother would have admired and then quietly worried about scratching. We took our seats. Daniel sat beside me, his parents across, his sister and her husband at either end. The meal began with grace. His father bowed his head and gave thanks for family, for blessings for the year behind and the year ahead. His words were sincere, practiced, and complete. When he finished, everyone lifted their heads. "Please," his mother said, "eat." The food was good, very good. Ham glazed perfectly, sweet potatoes rich and soft, green beans with almonds, rolls warm and light, everything prepared with care. But the conversation never settled. So his mother said after a few minutes, turning to me again, "Do you plan to continue working after the wedding?" "Yes," I said. "In the same position?" she asked. "For now," I replied. She nodded, exchanging a brief glance with her husband. "I only ask," she continued, "because Daniel has worked very hard to build a certain lifestyle. Stability is important." "I agree," I said. His sister smiled faintly. "Of course, sometimes priorities shift after marriage." "Sometimes," I said. Daniel shifted beside me. I could feel the tension in his arm. "They're just trying to get to know you," he murmured quietly. "I understand," I said. His father set down his fork. "And what about long-term plans?" he asked. "Savings, retirement, those sorts of things." "I have a plan," I said. He smiled thinly. "I'm sure you do. It's just that, well, these things matter more when two people are building a life together." "Yes," I said again, "they do." There it was. Not outright insult, not yet. But the steady shaping of a narrative. A woman with modest means, limited prospects, a potential risk. Daniel tried to shift the subject again, but his mother brought it back. "We've seen situations before," she said, her tone gentle but firm, "where intentions are good, but differences in background can create complications." I looked at her. "What kind of complications?" "Oh," she said lightly, "expectations, financial habits, responsibilities." "And how those are shared," his father added. I folded my hands in my lap. "Shared how?" His mother smiled, equitably. The word hung in the air. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, it's a reasonable conversation," she said. "Yes," I said calmly, "it is." And then it happened. His father leaned back slightly. His mother reached beside her chair. The room quieted in a way that had nothing to do with the food. She placed a folder on the table, and with 2 fingers she slid it toward me. "We think this is best," she said, "before the wedding moves forward." This time I did not wait. I opened it. The first page was exactly what I expected. A prenuptial agreement. But as I read, I saw more than legal language. I saw assumptions. That I would contribute little, that I might depend, that I might take, that I needed to be managed before I could become part of their family. I read each line carefully. No one spoke. When I reached the end of the first page, I turned it. There were notes in the margin, in his mother's handwriting. "Important, must discuss before venue deposit." I closed the folder slowly, and only then did I look up. Daniel was staring at his plate. He hadn't said a word. I rested my hands lightly on the table, and for the first time that evening I allowed a small silence to settle. Not the silence of discomfort. The silence of understanding. They thought this was about money. They thought this was about protection. They thought I was the risk. I looked at Daniel, then at his parents, and I realized something with perfect clarity. This was not the moment I had been invited into their family. This was the moment they had decided who I was allowed to be. They had just made their move. They had no idea they had just chosen the wrong woman. I let the silence sit a moment longer than most people would have. Long enough for discomfort to settle into the room. Long enough for each of them to wonder how I would react. Then I placed my fingertips lightly on the edge of the folder and said very calmly, "When was this drafted?" Daniel's mother straightened a fraction, a few weeks ago. I turned my eyes to Daniel. "You knew about it." He swallowed. "We talked about it. I didn't think." "You didn't think I should be told?" I asked. "It's not like that," he said quickly. "I just didn't want to upset you before the holidays." His father leaned forward slightly. "There's no need to make this adversarial. This is simply a precaution. Standard, really." "Standard for whom?" I asked. "For families in our position," he said. I nodded once as if that answered something. "And what position is that?" I asked. His sister shifted in her seat. "Dad just means people who have something to protect." "I see," I said. I opened the folder again, flipping back to the first page. "And you believe I do not?" No one answered that directly. Daniel's mother offered a soft, measured smile. "We don't know enough about your financial situation. That's exactly the point. These things are best clarified ahead of time." "Clarified," I repeated. I turned another page, scanning the language. Separate property clauses, limitations on claims, provisions that read less like mutual protection and more like a line drawn in advance. "And who drafted this?" I asked. "Our family attorney," his father said. "For both parties?" I asked. A pause. "Well, he said our attorney prepared the initial document. You would of course be free to have your own counsel review it." "Of course," I said quietly. I closed the folder again and rested my hands on top of it. Daniel reached for his water glass and took a sip he didn't seem to need. His hand trembled just slightly. "It's not personal," he said. "They would ask this of anyone." I turned my head slowly and looked at him. "Would you?" I asked. He hesitated. "That's not fair," he said. "No," I agreed, "it isn't." His mother leaned in her tone, still gentle but firmer now. "We are not accusing you of anything. We are simply being responsible. Marriage is not just emotional, it is practical." "I agree," I said. Her smile returned relieved. "Then you understand." "I understand that you believe you are being practical," I said. "What I am still trying to understand is what exactly you believe you are protecting your son from." The words landed more directly than anything I had said so far. His father's expression tightened. "From complications," he said, "from misunderstandings, from situations that become difficult to unwind later." "Difficult for whom?" I asked. "For everyone involved," he replied. I nodded again as though this were a conversation I was taking seriously. "Because I slid the folder a few inches back toward myself, not rejecting it, not accepting it, simply holding it in place. "And Daniel," I said, turning back to him, "you agreed to this." "I didn't agree," he said quickly. "I just didn't stop it." "That's the same thing," I said. He flinched slightly, like a man who has just realized the weight of a small decision. I let the silence return just for a breath. Then I asked very evenly, "What is the current value of Daniel's trust?" The question shifted the air in the room immediately. His father blinked. "I'm sorry." "You mentioned protection," I said. "I assume that includes existing assets. So I'm asking, what is the current value of his trust?" Daniel's sister gave a short, surprised laugh. "That's a little direct, don't you think?" "I'm being practical," I said. His father's mouth tightened. "That's not something we discuss casually. And yet you are asking me to sign a legal document that would affect my future based on that information," I said. "So I don't see how it can remain undisclosed." No one spoke for a moment. I continued, my tone unchanged. "Is the house in Daniel's name or held in a family trust?" "That's not relevant," his father said. "It is if we are discussing marital property," I replied. Daniel shifted in his chair. "We don't need to go into all that tonight." "We don't?" I asked. His mother stepped in quickly. "This is exactly why we wanted to have this conversation early, so that expectations are clear." "Clear for whom?" I asked again. Her smile thinned. I let my gaze move across the table, taking in each of them in turn. "I'm also curious," I said, "about Daniel's outstanding liabilities." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" "You have a credit line connected to the business you started 2 years ago," I said. "Is that fully resolved?" The color drained from his face. His sister looked at him sharply. "What is she talking about?" "It's nothing," Daniel said quickly. "It's handled." "Is it?" I asked, still calm. His father frowned. "How would you know about that?" I met his eyes. "Because I listen," I said. The room had gone very still now. No one was eating anymore. The tree lights blinked quietly in the corner. Daniel stared at me, something like confusion and fear mixing behind his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. I considered that for a moment. "Because you asked me to take this seriously," I said. His mother set her fork down carefully. "This feels unnecessary." "Does it?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "We are trying to approach this in a respectful, structured way." "And I am responding in the same way," I said. Her expression hardened just a fraction. "You are being defensive," she said. "I am being thorough," I replied. His father leaned back in his chair, studying me now with a different kind of attention. "What exactly do you do on base?" he asked. There it was. Not curiosity. Recalculation. I held his gaze. "More than filing paperwork," I said. Daniel let out a quiet breath. Can we just slow down for a second?" "No," I said gently. "I don't think we should." He looked at me startled. "Because this moment matters," I continued. And if we move past it too quickly, we'll pretend it didn't happen the way it actually did." His mother folded her hands in front of her. "We have treated you with respect," she said. I looked at her for a long moment. "No," I said quietly, "you have treated me with caution." The difference seemed to land. No one spoke. I rested my hand lightly on the folder again. "You are not wrong to want clarity," I said. "You are not wrong to want fairness. Those are reasonable things." His father's shoulders relaxed slightly as though he thought we were moving toward agreement. "But fairness requires information," I continued, "on both sides." I slid the folder a little farther back toward the center of the table. "And right now," I said, "you don't have mine." Daniel's mother frowned. "Then perhaps this is the time to share it." I looked at her, then at Daniel. And in that moment I understood something with absolute certainty. They still believed this conversation was happening on their terms. They still believed they were setting the conditions. They still believed I was the one who needed to prove something. I took a slow breath. And for the first time that evening I allowed myself to consider what would happen next. Not as a reaction, as a decision. I straightened slightly in my chair, and I said very calmly, "All right. All right," I said again a little more firmly this time so there would be no misunderstanding. I folded my hands neatly on top of the contract. "If we're going to have a serious conversation about fairness, then we should do it properly." Daniel's mother nodded once relieved, as if she believed I was finally stepping into the role she had prepared for me. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what we're asking." I looked at Daniel first. "Before I answer anything else," I said, "I need to understand something." He met my eyes uneasy. "Okay. Why didn't you stop this?" I asked. He swallowed. "I told you I didn't want to cause a scene." "A scene?" I repeated quietly. "I thought if we just got through dinner we could talk about it later, privately, without all this." "All this," I said, glancing at the folder, "was already decided. The only thing you postponed was telling me." He didn't answer. I let that settle between us. Then I turned to his parents. "You said you want clarity," I continued, "so let me offer you some." I sat back slightly in my chair, not in defiance, but in composure. "I am 38 years old," I said. "I have supported myself since I was 18. I do not carry personal debt. I own my home. I maintain my own retirement accounts. I do not depend on Daniel for financial stability, and I do not require access to your family's assets to live comfortably." Daniel's sister blinked, surprised. His father's eyes narrowed, reassessing. "And as for my work," I added, "you are correct that I am on base." I paused just long enough for the weight of that understatement to register. "But not in the way you've assumed." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" I looked at him. Then I looked at his parents. And I spoke plainly. "I am a Major General in the United States Marine Corps." For a moment no one reacted. It was too far outside what they expected. Then his sister let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "I'm sorry, what?" "I am a 2-star general," I said, my voice calm even. "I command personnel, oversee operations, and make decisions that carry legal, financial, and human consequences. My responsibilities extend well beyond administrative duties." Daniel stared at me. "You're serious," he said. "Yes." His mother's expression shifted, confusion giving way to something sharper. That's not something one would hide." "I didn't hide it," I said. "I simply didn't lead with it." His father leaned forward, studying me in a way he hadn't before. "If that's true," he said slowly, "then why? Why am I sitting here in an old coat I finished for him?" He didn't answer. I gave him the courtesy of finishing the thought anyway. "Because I wanted to know how you would treat someone you believed had nothing to offer you." The words settled into the room like a stone dropped into still water. Daniel looked at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. "You never told me," he said quietly. No, I agreed I didn't. "Why?" he asked. I held his gaze. "Because I wanted one relationship in my life that wasn't shaped by rank," I said. "I wanted to know if I could be known as a person before I was known as a title." His mother shook her head slightly. "This feels misleading." "Does it?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "You allowed us to believe something that wasn't true." "I allowed you to believe something you never questioned," I replied. His father sat back slowly. "And now?" he asked. "Now," I said, "we're having the conversation you wanted, with all the information on the table." I lifted the folder again, tapping it lightly. This document, I continued, is not inherently unreasonable. Prenuptial agreements can be useful when both parties enter them with full knowledge, independent counsel, and mutual respect. His mother nodded a bit too quickly. Exactly. But this, I said, opening it again and turning it so they could see, is not that. I pointed to a clause. This section assumes a disparity of income and restricts future claims accordingly. That assumption is incorrect. I turned another page. This provision limits access to certain assets without disclosing their structure. That creates an imbalance of information. Another page. And this language here, I added, tapping the margin note, is not legal at all. It's personal. It reflects a concern about character rather than a concern about assets. Daniel's sister shifted uncomfortably. His father frowned. Our attorney drafted that. Your attorney drafted a document based on your perspective, I said, not on a full understanding of both parties involved. And what would you suggest? He asked. I would suggest, I said calmly, that if we are to discuss a legal agreement, it should be drafted by separate counsel with full disclosure from both sides and with terms that protect each party equally. His mother's lips pressed into a thin line. And you expect us to simply accept that she asked? I expect you to recognize that I am not the person you assumed I was, I said. The room went quiet again. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I don't even know what to say. You could start with the truth, I said. He looked at me pained. I didn't think it mattered. It mattered to them, I said, and you let it matter without question. His father exhaled slowly. Well, he said this is unexpected. Yes, I said, it is. His mother picked up her glass of wine, took a small sip, and set it back down carefully. If what you're saying is accurate, she said, then perhaps we all made some incorrect assumptions. That's one way to put it, I replied. Her eyes met mine. And you, she added, chose not to correct them. That's also true. A long pause followed. Then she said, I suppose the question now is where we go from here. I considered that. I looked at Daniel, at his father, at his mother, at the contract still resting between us. And I realized something that had nothing to do with rank or money or legal language. This was no longer about what they thought of me. It was about what I thought of them. I closed the folder gently and set it back on the table. You asked for clarity, I said. And now you have it. For a moment after I said it, no one moved. The contract sat in the center of the table like something that had lost its purpose. Daniel's mother was the first to recover. She adjusted her napkin, smoothed it once across her lap, and lifted her chin just slightly. Well, she said, her voice carefully measured, this certainly changes the context. Does it? I asked. Her eyes flickered, not expecting that answer. Of course it does. We were operating under a certain understanding. Yes, I said, you were. His father leaned forward, resting his elbows lightly on the table. You have to admit, he said, most people would have disclosed something like that. Most people lead with whatever they think will secure their position, I replied. I chose not to. Daniel looked between us, his face pale. I still don't understand, he said. Why didn't you tell me, not just them, me? I turned to him fully. Because I needed to know who I was building a life with, I said. Not who you would become if you knew my rank. That's not fair, he said. No, I said quietly. What happened tonight wasn't fair. He flinched at that. His sister shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable now. Okay, but this feels like a test, she said. Like you set this up. I didn't set anything up, I said. I accepted an invitation. And showed up pretending to be someone else, she said. I held her gaze. I showed up without announcing myself. There was a difference. His mother exhaled slowly. Regardless, she said, we are where we are. And we still need to discuss the future. I nodded once. We do. She leaned forward slightly, regaining some of her composure. Then, let's be practical. If you truly are in the position you claim, then you understand the importance of structure. Agreements, boundaries. I do, I said. Then you must also understand that families like ours are not unique, I said, gently cutting her off. Her lips pressed together. I have spent my entire adult life working with people from every background you can imagine, I continued. Wealthy, poor, educated, not. What distinguishes them is not what they have. It's how they behave when they believe no one is watching. No one spoke. Daniel stared down at his hands. I shifted my attention back to him. Daniel, I said, my tone softer now, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer honestly. He looked up. When your parents decided to present this tonight, I said, tapping the folder lightly, did you agree with them? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I thought it was reasonable, he said finally, just as a precaution. Even knowing what you know about me, I asked. He hesitated. I didn't know this, he said, gesturing slightly toward me, toward everything I had just revealed. No, I said, but you knew me. That landed harder. He looked down again. I didn't think they were trying to hurt you, he said quietly. That's not what I asked, I replied. Silence stretched between us. Then slowly he said, I didn't stop them. I nodded once. That's what I needed to know. His mother leaned in quickly. Daniel was trying to keep the peace, she said. You can't fault him for that. I turned my head toward her. Yes, I said, I can. Her eyes widened slightly. Keeping the peace, I continued, at the expense of someone else's dignity, is not peace. It's avoidance. His father shifted in his chair. Now hold on, he said. No one intended to compromise your dignity. I met his gaze. You handed me a document designed to limit my place in your family before you understood who I was, I said. You made assumptions about my character based on what I wore, what I said, and what you believed I could offer. That's not, his sister began. It is, I said, still calm. The room fell quiet again. I let it. Then I did something none of them expected. I reached down, slipped the engagement ring from my finger, and placed it gently on the table beside the contract. The small sound it made against the wood seemed louder than anything else that night. Daniel's head snapped up. What are you doing? He asked. I'm pausing, I said. Pausing. His voice cracked slightly. You're taking the ring off in front of my family and calling it a pause. Yes, I said. Why? He demanded. I looked at him, not unkindly. Because I don't know if you're ready to stand beside me, I said, and I'm not willing to build a marriage on uncertainty. His mother's face tightened. This is an overreaction, she said. No, I replied, it's a decision. His father leaned forward, his voice firmer now. You're going to walk away from an engagement over a conversation. I'm stepping back, I corrected him, because of what that conversation revealed. Daniel shook his head, disbelief and hurt written across his face. You could have told me, he said again. And you could have trusted me, I said. That was the truth at the center of it. Not the contract. Not the dinner. Trust. I stood slowly, smoothing my skirt. Thank you for the meal, I said to his parents, my voice steady. It was very well prepared. His mother stared at me, speechless now. I picked up my coat from the chair where it had been placed earlier. The worn wool felt heavier in my hands than it had when I arrived. Before I turned to leave, I looked at Daniel one last time. I meant what I said, I told him. This isn't the end, but it's not the beginning anymore either. He didn't move. None of them did. I walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped out into the cold December night. The air hit my face sharp and clean. Behind me, I heard the door close. And for the first time that evening, I allowed myself to feel it. Not anger. Not triumph. Loss. Because sometimes the hardest part of seeing people clearly is realizing they're not who you hoped they were. The first few days after Christmas were the quietest I could remember in years. Not the kind of quiet you get after a long day's work when you sit down with a cup of tea and let the world settle. This was a deeper kind, the kind that leaves space for thoughts you've been too busy to face. I went back to base on the morning of the 26th. The routine helped. There were briefings waiting, reports that needed review, a personnel issue that had been delayed over the holiday. In my world, decisions didn't pause because it was Christmas. People still depended on clarity, on direction, on someone willing to take responsibility. So I stepped back into that role without hesitation. In uniform, everything made sense. People stood when I entered a room. Conversations tightened. Information was presented directly. No one wondered what I contributed or whether I belonged at the table. My authority wasn't a question, it was a fact. There is comfort in that even if you don't admit it. But when I came home in the evenings, the silence returned. My townhouse felt larger than it had before. The small artificial tree still stood in the corner of the living room, lights unplugged, now ornaments, catching the faint glow from the street lamp outside. The pie Daniel had brought was still on the counter the first night. I threw it away the next morning. I didn't hear from him right away. That didn't surprise me. Daniel was not a man who rushed into difficult conversations. He approached them the way some people approach cold water, slowly, carefully hoping to adjust before fully stepping in. On the third day he called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was short. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't even know where to start, but I'm sorry. Please call me when you're ready." I listened to it once, then I deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of discipline. I had learned over the years that immediate responses often come from emotion, not clarity, and I wanted to understand what I felt before I tried to explain it to him. A week passed. Work filled most of it. Meetings, reviews, long hours that blurred into one another. There were moments when I forgot entirely about Christmas dinner, about the contract, about the look on Daniel's face when I placed the ring on the table. But then something small would bring it back. A couple holding hands in a parking lot, a wedding announcement in the paper, a Christmas card left unopened on my kitchen counter. By the second week, the calls stopped. Instead, a letter arrived. It was handwritten. I recognized his handwriting immediately, careful, slightly slanted the way he always wrote grocery lists. I set it on the table and looked at it for a long time before opening it. When I finally did, I read it slowly. He didn't try to defend himself. That was the first thing I noticed. He wrote about that night, about what he had seen and what he had failed to see. He admitted that he had known about the contract and had convinced himself it was just a formality. He admitted that he had been more concerned with avoiding conflict than with protecting me. "I thought I was being reasonable," he wrote. "I thought I was keeping things smooth. I didn't realize I was letting you walk into something unfair." He paused there, then continued. "I also didn't realize how much I liked the version of you I thought I knew." That line made me stop. He went on to explain it. He said it had been easier to feel steady, confident, even a little important beside someone he believed needed him. That he had never asked deeper questions about my work because he didn't want to disturb that balance. "I'm not proud of that," he wrote, "but it's true." I set the letter down for a moment and stared out the window. There it was. Not just an apology. Understanding. That mattered more than anything he could have said in the first few days. The next letter came 4 days later. This one was shorter. "I've started seeing someone," he wrote, "a counselor. I don't think I know how to handle my parents the way I should. I want to learn." He didn't ask me to come back. He didn't ask me to forgive him. He just told me what he was doing. That mattered too. By the third week, I had 3 letters. Each one a little clearer than the last. He wrote about his childhood, about the way his parents made decisions, about how disagreement was handled, not through open conflict, but through quiet pressure. He wrote about how he had learned to keep peace by stepping aside rather than standing up. "I thought that was maturity," he wrote. "I'm starting to see it was avoidance." I read that line twice. Then I folded the letter carefully and placed it with the others. I didn't respond. Not yet. Around that same time, I received a call I hadn't expected. Daniel's mother. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. "Hello." There was a brief pause on the other end. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "You're not," I replied. Another pause. "I wanted to follow up," she said, choosing her words carefully. "About Christmas." "Yes," I said. "I believe things may have been misunderstood," she continued. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "In what way?" I asked. "We were trying to be responsible," she said, "and perhaps the way we approached it was too direct." "Directness wasn't the issue," I said. She hesitated. "What was the issue in your view?" she asked. "Assumption," I said. Silence. Then more quietly, "I see." I wasn't sure she did. I also wanted to say, she added, that we were not aware of your position. "I understand that," I said. "And had we known," she continued, "we would have handled things differently." I let that sit for a moment. "Would you?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. "I would hope so," she said finally. That was honest in its way. Then perhaps the issue wasn't information, I said. It was perspective. Another silence. "I suppose," she said slowly, "there is some truth in that." We ended the call shortly after. It wasn't an apology. Not yet. But it was movement. The real change came a few days later. A letter arrived from Daniel's father. Typed, not handwritten. Brief. I misjudged you, it read. Not because of what you withheld, but because of what I assumed. That is my responsibility. I regret the way that manifested. No explanations. No excuses. Just that. I read it once. Then I set it aside. It was enough. Not to repair everything, but to acknowledge something had been broken. The following week I called Daniel. We agreed to meet. Not at his parents' house. Not at mine. At a small diner just off the highway. The kind of place where the coffee is always hot, the booths are worn, and no one pays much attention to who you are. It felt right. When I walked in, he was already there. He stood when he saw me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "Thank you for coming." I nodded. And for the first time since Christmas, we sat down across from each other, with nothing between us. He looked thinner. Not in a way most people would notice right away, but I saw it. The lines around his eyes were a little deeper. His shoulders didn't sit as easily as they used to. There was something in his posture less certain, more deliberate. He waited until I had settled into the booth before he sat down again. A waitress came over, poured coffee for both of us without asking, and left us with 2 menus we didn't need. "Thank you for coming," he said again. "You said that already," I replied, not unkindly. "I know," he gave a small, nervous smile. "I just didn't want to assume." "That's new," I said. He nodded. "I'm trying." We let that sit for a moment. Outside, cars moved steadily along the road. Inside, the quiet hum of conversation and clinking dishes created a kind of privacy that didn't feel forced. Around us, older couples leaned toward each other, sharing stories, finishing meals they had probably ordered the same way for years. It grounded the moment. Daniel wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "I read your face that night," he said. "After the contract, I knew something had changed. I just didn't understand what." "You understand now?" I asked. He nodded slowly. More than I did. Not completely, but enough to know I was wrong. I didn't respond right away. He continued. "I kept telling myself it wasn't a big deal," he said, "that it was just paperwork, that everyone does it." "Everyone doesn't," I said. "I know that now." He paused. "It wasn't the contract, was it?" "No," I said, "it wasn't." "It was me," he said. "It was what you didn't do," I corrected gently. He looked down at the table. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "A lot." I waited. "I always thought I was a good man," he continued, "and in a lot of ways I still think I am. But I've started to realize that being good when things are easy doesn't mean much." "No," I said quietly, "it doesn't." He met my eyes. "I didn't stand up for you," he said. "Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to deal with my parents. I told myself I'd fix it later privately, but by then the damage was already done." "Yes," I said. "I'm sorry," he said. I believed him. But belief, I had learned, was not the same as trust. "What have you done since then?" I asked. He seemed relieved by the question, grounded by it. "I've been seeing a counselor," he said, like I wrote, twice a week at first, now once. I nodded. "I didn't realize how much of my life I've spent trying to keep things smooth," he went on. "How much I avoid conflict, especially with my parents." "That's not uncommon," I said. "I know," he replied. "But it's not something I want to keep doing." He took a breath. "I met with a lawyer too," he added. "Not my parents' attorney, my own." That caught my attention. And I asked. He explained what a fair agreement actually looks like, Daniel said. Mutual disclosure, separate representation, terms that protect both people, not just one. "That's correct," I said. I didn't know that he admitted, I just assumed my parents did. "Assumption seems to run in your family," I said. He gave a small, rueful smile. "Yeah, I've noticed." We sat quietly for a moment, both of us absorbing what had been said. Finally, he looked at me again. "I'm not asking you to come back," he said. "Not yet. I know I don't have that right." I appreciated that. "I just wanted you to know I'm working on it," he continued. "On myself, on how I handle things, on how I show up." I studied him. He wasn't trying to persuade me. He wasn't trying to charm his way back into place. He was simply telling the truth as he understood it. That was new. "What about your parents?" I asked. He exhaled slowly. "That's been harder," he said. "But I've started setting boundaries." "In what way?" I told them I wouldn't discuss our relationship unless you were present, he said. And that if we ever move forward again, decisions like that, he nodded toward the invisible memory of the contract, won't happen without both of us involved from the beginning. And how did they respond, I asked. My mom was upset, he admitted. My dad didn't say much at first, but he wrote you that letter. I received it, I said. He nodded. He doesn't apologize easily, Daniel said. That was a lot for him. I know, I said. We fell into another quiet. The waitress came back, refilled our coffee, and asked if we wanted anything else. We both shook our heads. When she left, Daniel spoke again. I don't expect you to trust me right now, he said. I just want the chance to become someone you can trust again. I let that sit between us. Outside, a truck passed its headlights, sweeping briefly across the window. Trust isn't something you ask for, I said finally. It's something you build. I know, he said. And it takes time, I added. I have time, he replied. I looked at him for a long moment. There was no certainty in what I felt. No clear answer. But there was something else. Possibility. I'm not ready to decide anything today, I said. I understand, he said. But I am willing to keep talking, I continued. Relief moved across his face, quiet but unmistakable. Thank you, he said. I nodded once. We finished our coffee in a more comfortable silence than before. When we stood to leave, he didn't reach for my hand. He didn't try to close the distance. He simply walked beside me to the door. Outside, the air was cold again, though not as sharp as it had been on Christmas Eve. We stood there for a moment. Same place next week, he asked. Yes, I said. He smiled, small and genuine. I'll be here, he said. I know, I replied. And as I walked to my car, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before. Not that everything would be easy. Not that everything would be fixed. But that sometimes people can learn. If this story made you pause even for a moment and think about how we treat others when we believe they have nothing to offer, then it's already done something meaningful. If you've ever been underestimated, or if you've ever realized you underestimated someone else, you're not alone. Stories like this remind us that respect isn't earned through titles or wealth, it's revealed through behavior. If this resonated with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need that reminder today. And if you'd like to hear more stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of truth that changes people slowly, you're always welcome here.